They say no good deed goes unpunished, and Jake Lawson learned that the hard way. One moment, he's a hero pulling a millionaire CEO from the jaws of death. The next, he's jobless, insuranceless, watching his daughter struggle to breathe with an empty inhaler. But when 3 black helicopters land outside his crumbling apartment, everything changes. This is the story of how one split-second decision rewrote 2 lives forever. Stay with me until the end and comment what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The wind at 50 stories didn't howl. It screamed. Jake Lawson stepped carefully along the I-beam, his boots gripping the narrow steel with practiced precision. Below him, Chicago sprawled like a circuit board, cars threading through streets no wider than veins, people reduced to moving specks. Up here, the world made sense. Up here, everything followed rules: physics, tension, load-bearing capacity. No gray areas, no maybes. Steel held or it didn't. You fell or you didn't. He preferred it that way. "Lawson, eyes on your work, not the skyline." The shout came from Tommy Briggs, the site foreman, a thick-necked man whose voice carried like a foghorn even against the wind. Jake didn't bother looking back. He'd heard that tone 1,000 times, the voice of a man who mistook volume for authority. Instead, Jake reached the junction point, checked the bolts, and marked his clipboard. Green, solid, good for another decade if the specs held. "Copy that, Tommy," Jake called back, his voice steady but tired. Tired was his default setting these days. He glanced at his watch, 11:47 a.m. Lunch break in 13 minutes. Not that he'd brought lunch. Money was too tight, and Maya needed new shoes. The ones she wore to school yesterday had cardboard stuffed in the sole to cover the hole. She'd noticed. He'd seen her trying to hide her feet under her desk when he picked her up, her cheeks pink with embarrassment. 7 years old and already learning shame. Jake's jaw tightened. He clipped the clipboard to his belt and moved to the next section, muscle memory guiding him across the beam. 23 years in construction. 12 as an iron worker, the rest doing whatever paid. He'd built half this city, one rivet at a time. His hands were scarred maps of sacrifice, each callus a chapter, each burn mark a verse in the gospel of hard work. And what did he have to show for it? An eviction notice folded in his left pocket. A photo of Maya in his right, gap-toothed, grinning, holding a dandelion like it was a rose. Taken 3 months ago, back when Sarah was still alive. Back when life had a rhythm, however imperfect. Sarah had snapped that photo in the park, laughing as Maya blew the seeds into the wind, wishing for a puppy. Now Sarah was gone. Aneurysm. Sudden, brutal, final. And Maya's wish had changed from puppies to, "Daddy, when are you coming home?" "Lawson, you deaf?" Tommy's voice again, closer now. Jake turned to see the foreman clambering across the scaffolding, his face red with exertion or irritation, probably both. Tommy was the kind of man who wore anger like cologne, dousing himself in it every morning. "I hear you fine, Tommy. What's up?" "What's up?" Tommy stopped a few feet away, gripping a support cable. "What's up is you're 3 beams behind schedule. What's up is I got the main contractor breathing down my neck about deadlines. What's up is you've been distracted for weeks, and it's starting to show." Jake's hands tightened around his wrench. "I'm doing my job." "Barely." Tommy spat over the edge, watching the saliva disappear into the void. "Look, I get it. Your wife? That's rough. But grief doesn't pay bills, and it sure as hell doesn't build buildings. Either you get your head in the game, or what?" Jake's voice dropped, cold as the steel beneath his feet. Tommy's eyes narrowed. "Or maybe you need some time off, unpaid, to sort your priorities." The words landed like a punch. Unpaid leave? Jake was already drowning, 2 months behind on rent, credit cards maxed out, Maya's asthma medication costing more than he made in a week. 3 days without a paycheck would sink them. "You can't do that," Jake said, fighting to keep his voice level. "I haven't missed a shift. I haven't what? Haven't been late? You were 17 minutes late on Monday. Haven't made mistakes? You mismeasured that support column on the 14th floor, cost us 2 hours and $600 in materials. Haven't been a liability? Lawson, you're walking around like a ghost. I can't have that on my site. I fixed the column. I stayed late. Doesn't matter." Tommy pulled a yellow envelope from his jacket and thrust it at Jake. Consider this a suspension. 3 days. Starting now. Use the time to figure out if you still want this job because right now, you're more trouble than you're worth. Jake stared at the envelope, his mind reeling. Suspended. 3 days without pay. The eviction hearing was Friday, 2 days away. Without this week's check, he'd have nothing. They'd be out on the street. Tommy, please, I need this job. My daughter should have thought about that before you started phoning it in. Tommy turned, done with the conversation. Get off my sight. Come back Monday with your head straight or don't come back at all. Jake stood frozen on the beam, the envelope crumpling in his fist. Around him, the city hummed with indifferent life. Sirens, horns, the distant clatter of a train. 50 stories up, and he'd never felt smaller. He looked down at the envelope. Inside, he knew, would be paperwork. Official warnings, signature lines, the bureaucratic machinery of failure grinding into motion. He stuffed it in his pocket next to the eviction notice, twins of disaster, keeping each other company. You good, man? The voice belonged to Carlos, a younger iron worker with kind eyes and tattoos that told stories Jake had never asked about. Carlos had been on the far end of the platform, pretending not to hear the confrontation, but clearly aware. Yeah, Jake lied. I'm good. That's bullshit, what Tommy just did. Everyone knows you're the best on this crew. Jake managed a bitter smile. Best doesn't matter if you can't stay focused. You just lost your wife, Jake. You're raising a kid alone. You're allowed to be human. Apparently not. Jake unclipped his safety harness from the main line. See you Monday. Maybe. Hey. Carlos stepped closer, lowering his voice. You need anything? I got some savings. Not much, but I'm fine. Jake cut him off, not unkindly. Carlos had his own problems, a sick mother, a brother in trouble. The last thing Jake would do was take money from a man who had barely more than him. But thanks. He descended the scaffolding in silence, each step heavy with the weight of what he'd just lost. At ground level, the construction site buzzed with activity. Guys welding, shouting measurements, hauling materials. Life continuing as if the world hadn't just collapsed. Jake walked past the tool shed, past the brake trailer, past the security gate, where Hector gave him a sympathetic nod. Rough day, amigo? Something like that. His truck sat in the far corner of the lot, a rusted Ford Ranger held together by duct tape and prayer. Jake climbed in, shut the door, and just sat there for a moment, staring at the steering wheel. 3 days. How was he going to tell Maya? The truck coughed to life on the second try, belching blue smoke. Jake pulled out of the lot and merged into traffic, his mind already calculating. He had $47 in checking, $19 in cash. A credit card that might accept a charge if he was lucky. Maya needed her inhaler refilled, $60 at the pharmacy even with the discount card. That left $6 for food, gas, and hope. His phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen mounted on the dash. Blocked number. Probably a debt collector. He ignored it. The city passed by in a blur. Graffiti-tagged warehouses, corner stores with security bars, kids playing basketball in a fenced court. This neighborhood had been Sarah's idea. It's not fancy, she'd said when they signed the lease 7 years ago, but it's ours. She'd made it work. Hung curtains, planted flowers in window boxes, turned 4 walls into a home. Without her, it was just walls again. 20 minutes later, Jake pulled up to Maya's school, Lincoln Elementary, a squat brick building with a playground that had seen better decades. He parked in the loading zone, engine still running. Through the chain-link fence, he could see kids at recess, their laughter sharp and bright. He scanned the crowd, looking for his daughter's dark hair, her pink backpack. There, by the swings. Maya sat alone on the far bench, her inhaler in her hands, staring at it like it held answers. Even from this distance, Jake could see the slump in her shoulders, the way she kept glancing at the other kids playing without her. His chest tightened. Before Sarah died, Maya had been fearless, climbed trees, raced boys, laughed loud and free. Now she was cautious, withdrawn, like she was afraid that if she moved too fast, she'd lose something else. The school bell rang. Kids flooded toward the doors, a river of backpacks and noise. Maya stood slowly, tucking the inhaler into her pocket, and walked inside. Jake's phone buzzed again. Same blocked number. This time, he answered. Yeah? Mr. Lawson? A woman's voice, crisp, professional. This is Jennifer Kim from Apex Construction's main office. I'm calling regarding an incident at the worksite earlier today. Jake's stomach dropped. I already got suspended. Tommy made that pretty clear. I'm not calling about your suspension, Mr. Lawson. I'm calling to inform you that due to protocol violations related to today's incident, your suspension is being upgraded to immediate termination. The words hit like a wrecking ball. Termination? I didn't... What protocol did I... You engaged in a verbal altercation with a supervisor in an active construction zone, creating a potential safety hazard, per company policy, Section 4. 7. Any confrontation that compromises site safety is grounds for dismissal. Your final paycheck will be mailed within... Wait, Tommy yelled at me. I wasn't... The decision is final, Mr. Lawson. Your badge and access will be deactivated as of 4 p.m. today. You'll receive separation paperwork by mail. Have a good day. The line went dead. Jake sat in his truck, staring at the phone, the engine idling rough beneath him. Fired. Not suspended. Fired. He'd lost his wife 4 months ago. Now he'd lost his job. The math was simple and brutal. No job, no insurance, no way to pay for Maya's medication, let alone rent. The eviction hearing was Friday, 48 hours away. By Monday, they'd be homeless. A knock on the window made him jump. A police officer stood outside, gesturing for him to roll down the glass. Jake complied, his hand suddenly shaking. You can't idle here, the officer said, not unkindly. Loading zones for active pickups only. Right, sorry. Jake shifted into gear. Leaving now. You okay, sir? You look... Fine, I'm fine. The officer studied him for a moment, then nodded. Drive safe. Jake pulled away, his vision blurring. He blinked hard. Not now. He couldn't brake now. Maya needed him solid, needed him strong. There'd be time to fall apart later. He drove aimlessly for 20 minutes, burning gas he couldn't afford, trying to think. Options. He needed options. Unemployment benefits? Took weeks to process, and he'd need to prove wrongful termination. Good luck with that. Family? His parents were gone. Sarah's family had never approved of him. Too blue-collar, too rough around the edges. They'd offered to take Maya after the funeral, just until you get on your feet. Translation? They thought he couldn't handle single parenthood. Proving them right wasn't an option. Friends? Carlos was the closest thing he had, and Carlos was drowning in his own problems. Jake pulled into a gas station and sat in the parking lot, watching people pump fuel and buy lottery tickets and live lives that hadn't shattered. His phone buzzed. Not a call this time. A text from Maya's school. Urgent. Maya Lawson experienced respiratory distress in class. Please come to the nurse's office immediately. Ice flooded his veins. Jake yanked the truck into reverse, tires squealing as he shot back onto the street. Lincoln Elementary was 6 minutes away. He made it in 4, running 2 red lights and parking diagonally across 3 spots. He sprinted through the main entrance, past the security desk. Sir, you need to sign... Down the hall to the nurse's office. The door was open. Inside, Maya sat on an examination table, her face pale, her breathing shallow and wheezy. Nurse Patterson stood beside her, holding an oxygen mask. Dad? Maya's voice was small, scared. Jake crossed the room in 3 strides and pulled her into his arms. I'm here, baby. I'm here. Mr. Lawson, Nurse Patterson said gently. She had an asthma attack during math class. We administered her emergency inhaler from the school supply, but what? Jake kept his arms around Maya, feeling her small body tremble against his chest. But according to her files, she's due for a refill on her daily maintenance medication. Without it, these attacks are going to become more frequent. I know. I'll get it refilled. When? The nurse's tone wasn't accusatory, just concerned. Because this is the 3rd attack this month, Mr. Lawson. If they keep escalating up... I said I'll handle it. Jake's voice came out sharper than he intended. He softened it. I'll take care of it. Today. Nurse Patterson nodded slowly. Okay. But Jake, and I'm saying this as someone who cares, Maya needs stability right now. Medical stability, emotional stability. If there's anything the school can do, any resources we can connect you with, we're fine. Are you? Jake met her eyes. Nurse Patterson had worked at Lincoln for 20 years. She'd seen it all: poverty, neglect, families hanging on by threads. She wasn't judging, she was offering a lifeline. But Jake couldn't take it. Accepting help felt like admitting defeat, and he wasn't there yet, couldn't be there yet. We're fine, he repeated. Come on, Maya, let's get you home. He signed her out and carried her to the truck, her backpack slung over his shoulder. She didn't speak until they were pulling out of the parking lot. Dad? Yeah, sweetheart? Am I going to die like Mom did? The question punched the air from his lungs. He had to force himself to keep driving, keep breathing, keep functioning. No, he said, his voice thick. No, baby, you're going to be fine. Mom's thing, that was different. Your asthma is manageable. We just need to keep up with your medicine and you'll be okay. But what if we can't afford it? Jake's hands tightened on the wheel. 7 years old and already worrying about money. What kind of father let his daughter carry that weight? We'll afford it, he promised. Don't worry about that. That's my job. Okay. She was quiet for a moment. Then, Dad, why were you at school early? Did something happen at work? Jake swallowed hard. Just got off early today. Thought I'd surprise you. The lie tasted like ash, but what was he supposed to say? I got fired for being too sad about your mom dying? They drove the rest of the way in silence. Their apartment complex appeared like a judge's gavel. 5 stories of cracked concrete and peeling paint, satellite dishes clinging to balconies like barnacles. Home sweet home, someone had spray painted on the dumpster. Below it, no, it ain't. Jake parked and helped Maya out. She moved slowly, her breathing still labored. They climbed the exterior stairs to the 3rd floor, each step an effort. At apartment 3C, Jake fumbled with his keys. The door swung open to reveal their reality. A 1-bedroom with stained carpet and furniture from Goodwill. Dishes in the sink, laundry in a basket, medical bills stacked on the counter like a paper monument to failure. Go lie down, Jake told Maya. I'll bring you some water. She nodded and shuffled to the bedroom, technically Jake's room, but he'd been sleeping on the couch since Sarah died. Couldn't stand the empty side of the bed. Jake filled a glass from the tap and brought it to her. Maya was already curled up under her blanket, the one with faded unicorns that Sarah had bought at a yard sale years ago. Try to rest, he said, brushing hair from her forehead. I'm going to run to the pharmacy real quick. Can we afford it? There was that question again, like a splinter working deeper. Yes, Jake lied again. Get some sleep. He waited until her breathing evened out, then grabbed his wallet and keys. The pharmacy was 4 blocks away, a chain drugstore with fluorescent lights that made everyone look sick. Jake approached the counter where a tired pharmacist named Ron had filled Maya's prescriptions for years. Hey, Jake? The usual? Yeah, the maintenance inhaler. Ron typed into his computer, his expression shifting from neutral to sympathetic. Okay, so your insurance was terminated as of today. The medication without coverage is, let me check, $247. Jake's world tilted. 200? I don't have that. I had insurance this morning. Says here it was canceled at 4 p.m. I'm sorry, man. Sometimes if you call the insurance company, they can... I got fired today. The words came out hollow. That's why it's canceled. Ron winced. Damn, look, I can give you a generic alternative. It's not quite as effective, but it's better than nothing. That'll run you $83. 83. Jake had 66 in total. He was $17 short of keeping his daughter breathing. Can I pay part now and part later? Jake asked, hating the desperation in his voice. Ron glanced around, lowered his voice. Officially, no. Unofficially, I can float you the 17 if you promise to pay it back next time you're in. I promise. Thank you. God, thank you. Ron processed the transaction, and Jake walked out with a small paper bag containing a generic inhaler and a receipt that might as well have been a death certificate for his pride. He walked back to the apartment in a daze. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. Beautiful, in a way that felt like mockery. How dare the world be beautiful when everything was falling apart? Inside, Maya was still asleep. Jake set the medication on the nightstand and retreated to the living room, sinking onto the couch. He pulled out his phone and stared at his bank balance. £19.47. The eviction hearing was Friday. Rent was $1,200. Even if he found a job tomorrow, which he wouldn't, he couldn't catch up. They'd be evicted. Then what? Shelters? Living in his truck? And what about Maya's school, her stability, her asthma? For the first time since Sarah died, Jake felt the full weight of his situation crushing down. He'd been running on adrenaline and denial, telling himself he could handle it, that hard work and willpower would be enough. But it wasn't enough. He wasn't enough. He dropped his face into his hands and let the truth wash over him. He was failing. Failing Maya. Failing Sarah's memory. Failing everything. A soft sound made him look up. Maya stood in the doorway, clutching her unicorn blanket, her eyes wide. "Dad? Are you crying?" Jake wiped his face quickly. "No, baby, just tired." She patted over and climbed onto the couch next to him, tucking herself under his arm. "It's okay to be sad," she said softly. "Mom told me that." She said being sad means you loved something. Jake's throat closed up. He pulled Maya closer, breathing in the scent of her strawberry shampoo. She was right, he managed. She was always right. They sat like that as darkness filled the apartment, neither speaking, just existing together in the wreckage. Jake's mind drifted to tomorrow. He'd need to call the landlord, beg for an extension. He'd need to hit every construction company in the city, see if anyone was hiring. He'd need to figure out how to keep them afloat on fumes and prayer. But tonight, he just held his daughter and pretended the world wasn't ending. "Dad?" Maya's voice was drowsy now. "Yeah? Are we going to be okay?" Jake stared at the ceiling, at the water stain shaped like a cloud, and did what parents do when the truth is too heavy for small shoulders. He lied. "Yeah, sweetheart, we're going to be okay. And as the night deepened around them, Jake Lawson made a silent promise to Sarah's memory and to the little girl in his arms. He would find a way. He'd work 3 jobs if he had to. He'd sell everything he owned. He'd bleed himself dry. But he would not let Maya down, whatever it took. Outside, the city hummed with indifference. 1,000,000 people living their lives, unaware that in apartment 3C, a single father sat in the dark, holding on to the only thing that mattered, trying to believe his own promises. Tomorrow would bring new catastrophes. Tomorrow always did. But tomorrow was still hours away. For now there was just this, a father and daughter, together in the darkness, proving that love, however battered, however bruised, could still exist when everything else had fallen away. And maybe, in a world that seemed designed to break men like Jake Lawson, that was enough. For tonight, at least. It had to be. The alarm clock didn't go off, mainly because Jake had never set it. He'd spent the night on the couch, Maya curled against him, both of them drifting in and out of restless sleep. When dawn broke through the thin curtains, painting the apartment in shades of gray, Jake was already awake, staring at the ceiling and running calculations that never added up. The water stain above him had grown since last month. Another thing the landlord wouldn't fix. Another problem on a list so long it had become background noise. Maya stirred, her breathing still carrying that slight wheeze that made Jake's chest tighten. He checked his phone, 6:47 a.m. Normally he'd be on site by now, coffee in hand, ready to climb into the sky and earn another day's survival. Instead, he was unemployed, nearly broke, and about 36 hours away from being homeless. "Dad?" Maya's voice was thick with sleep. "Right here, sweetheart." She sat up, rubbing her eyes. "Do I have school today?" "It's Friday, so yeah." Jake stood, his back protesting from a night on the couch. "But first, let's get some breakfast in you." They went through the motions, cereal with milk that was 2 days from expiring, Maya's medication, clothes that were getting too small. Normal things, routine things, things that felt like lies when everything underneath was crumbling. "Dad, you're not wearing your work clothes," Maya observed as Jake pulled on jeans and a t-shirt instead of his usual Carhartt jacket and steel-toed boots. "Day off today," he said, forcing brightness into his voice. Thought I'd use the time to catch up on some things. Like what? Boring adult stuff. You wouldn't be interested. She studied him with those dark eyes that were too knowing for 7 years old. You're worried about something. Jake knelt down to her level, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. I'm always worried about something. That's what dads do. But I'm handling it, okay? You just focus on being a kid. Mrs. Patterson says I'm very mature for my age. Mrs. Patterson's right, but you're still allowed to just be 7. They finished breakfast in comfortable silence. Then Jake walked her to the bus stop 3 blocks away. Other kids gathered there, some with parents, some alone. Maya joined a girl named Sophie who lived in their building, and the two of them stood together, backpacks touching, whispering about whatever 7-year-olds whispered about. The bus arrived, yellow and loud, and Maya climbed aboard. Through the grimy window, she found Jake's face and waved. He waved back, maintaining his smile until the bus turned the corner and disappeared. Then the smile fell away like a mask. Jake pulled out his phone and started making calls. First, the landlord, straight to voicemail. He left a message asking about a payment plan, knowing it was futile but trying anyway. Next, 3 construction companies. 2 weren't hiring. The third said to come by Monday with his resume, which meant nothing immediate, nothing that would stop Friday's eviction hearing. He was walking back to his truck when his phone rang. Unknown number. Yeah? Mr. Lawson? A man's voice, crisp with authority. This is Detective Marcus Chen with CPD. I'm calling about an incident that occurred yesterday at the Apex construction site on South Michigan Avenue. Do you have a moment to speak? Jake's stomach dropped. An incident? I was there yesterday, but I didn't... What incident? I'd rather discuss this in person. Are you available this morning? Say, 9 o'clock at the 4th District Station? Am I being charged with something? No, sir. We just need your statement regarding what you witnessed. It's routine. Nothing about this felt routine, but Jake agreed. He had nowhere else to be, and refusing a police request seemed like a terrible idea when his life was already in free fall. The 4th District Station was a blocky concrete building that looked exactly like what it was, a place where bad days got officially documented. Jake parked in the visitor lot and went inside, where a desk sergeant directed him to the 3rd floor. Detective Chen turned out to be a lean man in his 40s with graying temples and tired eyes. He met Jake in a small conference room with a window overlooking the street. Mr. Lawson, thanks for coming in. Chen shook his hand and gestured to a chair. Coffee? I'm good. All right, let's get to it. Chen opened a folder and pulled out several photographs. They showed the construction site from yesterday, the same steel beams Jake had been inspecting, the same scaffolding he'd climbed. You were working on the Morrison Tower project yesterday morning, correct? Until I got suspended, yeah. Why were you suspended? Jake hesitated. Foreman said I was distracted, behind schedule. We had words about it. Tommy Briggs? That's him? Chen made a note. And after your suspension, did you leave the site immediately? Yeah. Packed up my stuff and left around noon. Did you witness anything unusual before you left? Any safety violations, equipment malfunctions, arguments between workers? Jake frowned. No more than usual on any site. Why? What happened? Chen studied him for a long moment, then slid another photo across the table. This one showed a section of scaffolding that had collapsed, twisted metal jutting at wrong angles, yellow caution tape blocking the area. That happened about 4 hours after you left. Scaffolding gave way on the 48th floor. 3 workers injured, 1 critically. We're investigating whether it was equipment failure, installation error, or something else. The air left Jake's lungs. Jesus, who got hurt? Carlos Mendez was the critical. He's at Northwestern Memorial in intensive care. Carlos, the kid who'd offered Jake money when he had barely any himself. The one who'd said everyone knew Jake was the best on the crew. Is he going to make it? Jake's voice came out rough. Too early to tell, but Mr. Lawson, here's why I called you in. Chen pulled out another document, engineering schematics. According to the site logs, you were the last person to inspect that specific section of scaffolding before the collapse. We need to know what you saw, what condition it was in, and whether you noted any concerns. Jake's mind raced back to yesterday morning. The wind, the steel, the bolts he'd checked and marked green on his clipboard. It was solid, I checked every connection point personally. That scaffolding was rated for twice the load it was carrying. You're certain? Detective, I've been doing this for 23 years. I know the difference between safe and unsafe. That section was good. Chen nodded slowly. I believe you. But here's the thing. Tommy Briggs is telling a different story. He says you were sloppy yesterday, that your head wasn't in the game, and that you might have missed something. Heat flooded Jake's chest. He's covering his ass. Tommy cuts corners on everything. He uses cheap materials, rushes installations, ignores code violations. I've filed 3 separate complaints about his practices. With who? With Apex's safety department. Never heard back on any of them. Chen wrote something down. I'm going to need copies of those complaints if you have them. They're in my email. I can forward them. Please do. Chen closed the folder. Look, Mr. Lawson, off the record, I don't think you did anything wrong. Your record shows you're meticulous, safety-conscious, and experienced. But Briggs is pushing hard to make this about worker error instead of management negligence. And right now, you're the easiest target because you're not there to defend yourself. Jake's jaw clenched. So what do I do? Forward me those complaint emails, and if you think of anything else from yesterday, anything that seemed off, any conversations you overheard, let me know. We're building a case, and the more documentation we have, the harder it'll be for Briggs to pin this on you. They wrapped up the interview, and Jake left the station feeling like he'd been kicked in the chest. Carlos was fighting for his life. Jake was being framed as the cause, and Tommy Briggs, that corrupt corner-cutting bastard, was rewriting history to save his own skin. Jake sat in his truck and forwarded the complaint emails to Detective Chen. Then he called Northwestern Memorial. I'm calling about Carlos Mendez, he told the receptionist. He was admitted yesterday after a construction accident. Are you family? No, but I'm sorry, sir. We can only release information to immediate family members. Jake hung up and pressed his forehead against the steering wheel. Carlos was 24 years old. He had a mother who cleaned houses, a younger brother who needed surgery they couldn't afford, and dreams of starting his own contracting company someday. Now he was in intensive care because Tommy Briggs valued profits over safety. And Jake had been there. Jake had inspected that scaffolding. Jake had signed off on it. What if he had missed something? What if grief had made him careless, and Carlos was paying the price? The doubt wormed into his brain like rot into wood. He tried to shake it off, tried to remember the bolts he'd checked, the structural integrity he'd verified. But exhaustion and stress had a way of making even certainties feel questionable. His phone buzzed. A text from the landlord's office. Reminder: eviction hearing tomorrow, Saturday, 10 a.m. Failure to appear will result in default judgment. Bring payment in full or proof of payment plan. Jake stared at the message until the screen went dark. Then he started driving, not toward home, but toward the Morrison Tower site. He needed to see the collapse for himself, needed to understand what had happened. The site was locked down when he arrived. Yellow caution tape everywhere, a security guard stationed at the entrance. Jake parked across the street and watched through the chain-link fence. From here, he could see the damaged scaffolding on the 48th floor, a dark scar against the gray steel skeleton. Workers moved around the site, but slowly, carefully. The energy was different, subdued, almost reverent. When someone nearly died, it changed things, reminded everyone that gravity doesn't negotiate. Jake was about to leave when a sleek black SUV pulled up to the site entrance. The security guard immediately straightened, opening the gate. The SUV rolled through and Jake caught a glimpse of the passenger. A woman in her 50s with silver hair pulled back severely, wearing a suit that probably cost more than Jake made in a month. Victoria Hale, owner and CEO of Apex Construction. Jake had seen her exactly twice in 12 years. Once at a company meeting, once in a photo on the break room wall. She wasn't someone who visited sites. She was someone who approved budgets and attended board meetings and existed in a different atmosphere than the men who actually built things. What was she doing here? Jake watched as she stepped out of the SUV, flanked by 2 men in suits who looked like lawyers or bodyguards or both. Tommy Briggs practically sprinted to meet her, his body language shifting from aggressive foreman to obsequious subordinate in seconds. They spoke briefly, Tommy gesturing toward the collapsed scaffolding, then toward the main building. Victoria nodded, her expression unreadable behind designer sunglasses. Then something happened that would change everything. A delivery truck came rumbling through the gate, one of those flatbed semis carrying steel I-beams. The driver, distracted by his phone, didn't see that his rig's brakes had failed until he was already rolling down the slight incline toward where Victoria and Tommy stood. Time fractured into slow motion. The truck picked up speed. Workers shouted warnings. Tommy dove left, scrambling to safety. But Victoria stood frozen, her brain clearly trying to process what was happening, but her body refusing to move. That moment of paralysis, Jake knew it well. He'd seen it in new workers on their first day at height. That instant where fear locks every muscle and the world narrows to a single point of terror. The truck was 15 feet away. 10. 7. Jake didn't remember deciding to move. His body acted on instinct, on 23 years of working in environments where hesitation meant death. He was out of his truck, through the fence gap, sprinting across the site before conscious thought caught up. 5 feet. 3. Jake hit Victoria like a linebacker, wrapping his arms around her waist and driving them both sideways. They crashed into a stack of wooden pallets just as the truck roared past, missing them by inches. The wind of its passing tore at Jake's shirt. Metal screamed as the truck finally lurched to a stop, 50 feet away, having demolished a tool shed and part of the temporary fencing. For a moment there was only silence and dust and the sound of Jake's heart trying to punch through his ribs. Then chaos erupted. Workers rushed over, shouting questions. The truck driver stumbled out of his cab, white-faced and shaking. Tommy Briggs appeared, yelling into his phone. And beneath Jake, pressed against the pallets, Victoria Hale lay absolutely still. "Ma'am?" Jake rolled off her, his body screaming with adrenaline. "Are you hurt? Can you move?" She drew in a sharp breath, then another. Her sunglasses had been knocked off, revealing gray eyes that were currently very wide and very focused on Jake's face. What? You... She couldn't seem to form complete sentences. "Take it slow," Jake said, gentler now. "You might be in shock. Don't try to stand up yet." One of the suited men, definitely security, pushed through the crowd. "Ms. Hale, are you injured?" I don't know." She touched her wrist, winced. "My hand. I think I hit it." An ambulance was already being called. Jake started to back away, to disappear into the crowd before anyone asked what he was doing there, but Victoria's hand shot out and grabbed his arm. "Wait, you saved my life. You were in danger. I reacted. Anyone would have—" "No!" Her voice was stronger now, cutting through the noise. "Everyone else froze. You didn't." She looked up at the security guard. "Who is this man?" Jake opened his mouth to answer, but Tommy Briggs materialized beside them, his face a mask of concern that didn't reach his eyes. "Ms. Hale, thank God you're all right. This is Jake Lawson. He's one of our workers. Was one of our workers. He was recently let go." Victoria's eyes sharpened. "Let go? Why?" "Performance issues," Tommy said smoothly. "Nothing personal, just—" "That's a lie," Jake said, his voice flat. "I was fired for speaking up about safety violations. The same violations that led to yesterday's collapse." Tommy's face darkened. "That's a serious accusation, Lawson. You got fired because you were sloppy and distracted. Everyone knows it. Everyone knows you cut corners and intimidate workers who try to report it." Jake stood, helping Victoria to her feet. "Detective Chen has my full statement, including the 3 formal complaints I filed about your practices. Complaints that your office ignored." "You're talking about things you don't understand," Tommy snarled. "You're a bitter ex-employee making wild—" "Enough!" Victoria's single word carried enough authority to silence both men. She swayed slightly, and both Jake and her security guard reached out to steady her. She waved them off. "I'm fine. Just shaken." She turned to Jake. "You said you filed complaints?" "Yes, ma'am. 3 separate reports over the past year documenting— I want copies. All of them." She looked at Tommy. "And I want you to explain why I'm only hearing about these now, after 3 men were injured on your watch." Tommy's mouth opened and closed. "Ms. Hale, I can explain later." She turned back to Jake. "What's your name again?" "Jake Lawson." "Jake Lawson." She repeated it like she was committing it to memory. You saved my life today. Whatever else happens, I won't forget that. The ambulance arrived, paramedics swarming around Victoria. They wanted to take her to the hospital for observation, but she refused until they'd at least examined her wrist. Sprained, they said. Not broken. She'd been lucky. They insisted Jake get checked too. Possible bruising, potential impact injuries. He tried to refuse, but Victoria cut him off. Let them examine you. You tackled me hard enough to knock the wind from both of us. So Jake endured the paramedics' poking and prodding while workers whispered and stared. He caught fragments of conversations. Did you see that? Moved like lightning. Saved the boss's life. But mostly he focused on staying calm, on not thinking about the fact that he'd just thrown himself in front of a moving truck while unemployed and uninsured. The paramedics declared him bruised but intact. Victoria's security team wanted to take statements, wanted his contact information, wanted to know exactly what he'd seen and when he'd reacted. Jake answered mechanically, his mind elsewhere. Carlos was still in intensive care. Jake was still fired. The eviction hearing was still tomorrow. Saving Victoria Hale's life didn't change any of that. Finally, they let him go. He was walking back to his truck when a voice called out, "Lawson, wait!" Tommy Briggs jogged up, his expression somewhere between fury and fear. "What the hell were you thinking, coming back here?" "You're trespassing." "I was across the street, public property." "And then you entered a restricted work site without authorization. To save someone's life. Yeah, real criminal behavior." Tommy stepped closer, lowering his voice. "You think you're clever, playing hero in front of the boss? You think this changes anything? You're still fired. You're still the guy who couldn't handle his job. And if you keep spreading lies about safety violations, they're not lies, and you know it." Jake met his glare without flinching. "Carlos is in the ICU because you value speed over safety. How many more people have to get hurt before someone holds you accountable?" "You self-righteous?" Tommy caught himself, glancing around. "You want to talk about accountability? Fine. I'm filing charges, trespassing, interference with a work site, assault. Assault. I saved. You tackled Ms. Hale. I'm sure her lawyers can make a case that you could have warned her instead of physically attacking her. Depends on how we spin it." Jake's hands curled into fists. "You're threatening to say, I'm promising, you want to make trouble for me? I'll bury you. You'll never work construction in this city again. Hell, you'll be lucky if you're not in jail." Tommy smiled, and it was the ugliest thing Jake had seen all day. "Walk away, Lawson. Keep your mouth shut. Stay out of our business, and maybe I'll let this go." For one terrible second, Jake imagined hitting him. Imagined driving his fist into that smug face and watching Tommy crumple. But violence wouldn't help Carlos. Wouldn't get his job back. Wouldn't keep a roof over Maya's head. So he did what he'd been doing for 4 months. He swallowed his rage and walked away. He was halfway to his truck when his phone rang. Maya's school. Again. "Mr. Lawson, this is Principal Morgan. I'm afraid Maya's had another incident." Jake's blood went cold. "What kind of incident?" "She collapsed during recess. The nurse administered her inhaler, but we think you should come get her. She's asking for you." Jake ran the remaining distance to his truck and drove to Lincoln Elementary doing 20 over the limit. He found Maya in the nurse's office again, pale and small on the examination table, her breathing labored. "Dad." She reached for him and Jake gathered her up. "I've got you, baby. I've got you." Nurse Patterson looked grim. "Mr. Lawson, this is serious. She needs to see a pulmonologist. These attacks are escalating, and without proper treatment—" "I know." Jake's voice cracked. "I know. I'll figure it out." "When?" "Soon." "That's what you said yesterday." Jake had no answer. He signed Maya out and carried her to his truck, buckling her into the passenger seat. She looked so small, so fragile. When had that happened? When had his fierce, tree-climbing daughter become this breakable thing? "Where are we going?" she asked. "Home. You need to rest. I'm tired of resting. I'm tired of feeling like this." "I know, sweetheart. We're going to fix it." "How?" Jake drove in silence because he didn't have an answer. They pulled up to their apartment building and Maya pointed at something in the parking lot. "Dad, why are there helicopters?" Jake followed her gaze and felt his world tilt again. 3 black helicopters sat in the park adjacent to their building, rotors still, their presence both surreal and vaguely threatening. Neighbors had gathered on balconies, taking photos. Kids on bikes circled at a safe distance. And standing next to the nearest helicopter, flanked by the same security team from earlier, was Victoria Hale. She was looking directly at Jake's truck. "Stay here," Jake told Maya, but she was already unbuckling her seatbelt, curiosity overcoming exhaustion. They approached together, Jake's hand on Maya's shoulder, his mind racing through possibilities. Tommy's assault charges. Police. Some elaborate revenge for... "Mr. Lawson," Victoria stepped forward, her sprained wrist wrapped in a professional bandage. "I apologize for the dramatic arrival. I wanted to speak with you privately, but you left before I could arrange it properly." "You could have called." "I could have. But after what happened today, I wanted to have this conversation in person." She glanced down at Maya. "And this must be your daughter." "Maya," Jake said automatically. "Maya, this is Ms. Hale. We met at work today." "Did you really come in a helicopter?" Maya's eyes were wide. Victoria smiled, the first genuine expression Jake had seen from her. "I did. Have you ever been in one?" "No. Dad says they're too expensive." "Maya," Jake said, his cheeks burning, but Victoria laughed. "Your father's right. They are expensive, also loud and not particularly comfortable, but they get you places quickly." She looked back at Jake. "May we speak inside?" "I promise this won't take long." Jake wanted to refuse, wanted to protect Maya from whatever this was, but his daughter was already tugging his hand toward their building, excited to show a helicopter CEO their apartment. They climbed to 3C, Jake acutely aware of every stain, every crack, every evidence of poverty. Victoria said nothing, but he saw her taking it in, the peeling paint, the furniture held together with hope, the medical bills on the counter. Maya immediately curled up on the couch with her unicorn blanket, her breathing still ragged. Victoria noticed. "Is she all right?" "Asthma," Jake said shortly. "She'll be fine once she rests." Victoria nodded slowly, then turned to face him fully. "Mr. Lawson, Jake, I'm going to be direct because I don't believe in wasting time. This morning, you saved my life. You acted without hesitation when everyone else froze, and you did it despite having every reason to let me face the consequences of my company's negligence." "I didn't think about it," Jake said. "I just moved." "Exactly. And that tells me more about your character than any resume could." She pulled an envelope from her jacket. "After you left the site, I spent 2 hours reviewing everything. The accident reports, the safety complaints you filed, Tommy Briggs's personnel record. I also made some calls to workers who've served under him. The picture that emerged was damning." Jake said nothing, afraid to hope. "Tommy Briggs has been fired," Victoria continued. "So has the site manager who ignored your complaints. I've ordered a complete safety audit of every project Apex is currently running, and I'm bringing in an independent firm to review our protocols." She paused. "I'm also offering you a job." The words hung in the air like something impossible. "A job," Jake repeated. "Director of Field Safety. You'll oversee safety compliance across all our projects, with full authority to halt work if you see violations. You'll report directly to me. The salary is $150,000 annually, plus full benefits, medical, dental, vision, housing allowance, company vehicle." She held out the envelope. "The formal offer is in here." Jake stared at the envelope like it might bite him. "I don't understand. I'm an iron worker. I don't have management experience. You have something better. You have integrity. You have 23 years of field experience, and you have the courage to act when others won't." Victoria's voice softened. "I started this company with my late husband 30 years ago. We built it on the principle that no profit is worth a person's life. Somewhere along the way, people like Tommy Briggs made me lose sight of that. You reminded me." "Ms. Hale, Victoria, please." "Victoria." Jake felt Maya's eyes on him from the couch. I don't know what to say." "Say you'll think about it. Or better yet, say yes. Because from what I saw today, the medical bills, the eviction notice you dropped earlier, the way you're barely holding things together, You need this. She wasn't being cruel, just honest. And I need someone I can trust to tell me the truth, even when it's uncomfortable. Especially when it's uncomfortable. Jake opened the envelope with shaking hands. Inside was a contract, dense with legal language, but the key numbers jumped out. $150,000. Full health coverage starting immediately. $2,000 monthly housing allowance. It was more money than he'd ever imagined making. It was salvation in 16 pages. There's one condition, Victoria said. If you accept, you start Monday. I need someone in that position immediately, and I need it to be you. Monday. Jake's mind spun. That's in 3 days. Is that a problem? No, He looked at Maya, who was watching him with those two knowing eyes. I need to think about it. Of course, take until tomorrow morning. My assistant's number is in the packet. Victoria headed for the door, then paused. Jake, your wife, when did she pass? The question caught him off guard. 4 months ago, aneurysm. I lost my husband 5 years ago. Construction accident at one of our sites, the very thing I'm trying to prevent now. Her voice carried the weight of old grief. I know what it's like to rebuild a life from wreckage. It's possible, but not alone. Let me help. She left, her security team trailing behind. Jake stood in the doorway and watched the helicopters lift off, their rotors churning the autumn air, carrying Victoria Hale back to whatever stratospheric level she normally occupied. When he closed the door, Maya was sitting up, her eyes bright despite her exhaustion. Dad? Are we going to be okay now? Jake looked at the contract in his hands, at the numbers that represented everything they needed and more. But something held him back, some instinct that said it couldn't be this easy, that salvation didn't arrive in helicopters and offer exactly what you needed most. Yeah, baby, he said finally. I think maybe we are. That night, after Maya fell asleep clutching her inhaler, Jake sat at the kitchen table and read the contract 3 times. It was legitimate. He'd worked construction long enough to spot the fake from the real. The salary, the benefits, the job description, all of it checked out. But accepting it meant entering Victoria's world, becoming someone who wore suits instead of work boots, who gave orders instead of taking them. It meant leaving behind everything he'd known for 2 decades. It also meant Maya got her medicine, got stability, got a future. By the time dawn broke, Jake had made his decision. He called the number Victoria had given him. This is Jake Lawson, he said when her assistant answered. Tell Ms. Hale I accept. I'll start Monday. The assistant's voice was professionally neutral. Excellent. Someone will be in touch with paperwork and logistics. Welcome to Apex, Mr. Lawson. Jake hung up and stared at his phone, feeling like he'd just stepped off a ledge without knowing how far the fall would be. But Maya was sleeping peacefully in the next room, her breathing finally steady. And for the first time in 4 months, Jake let himself believe that maybe, just maybe, they were going to survive this after all. The eviction hearing never happened. Jake called the landlord Saturday morning before the scheduled 10 o'clock appointment and explained that his employment situation had changed. The landlord, a weary man named Frank who'd seen enough desperation to recognize the real thing, agreed to accept a partial payment immediately and the rest by the 15th, once Jake's first paycheck cleared. You got lucky, Lawson, Frank said over the phone. But don't make me regret giving you another chance. I won't, Jake promised, and meant it. He spent the weekend in a strange liminal space between his old life and whatever was coming. Saturday morning, he took Maya to the free clinic and got her scheduled with a pulmonologist. The first available appointment was in 2 weeks, but at least it was scheduled. Saturday afternoon, he bought groceries without calculating every penny, filling the cart with actual food instead of the cheapest possible calories. Maya noticed. Dad, that's the expense of peanut butter, she said, pointing at the jar he'd grabbed. I know. But you always say we have to get the store brand. Jake knelt down beside the cart, meeting her eyes. Things are going to be different now, sweetheart. Better. I got a new job. A good one. We're going to be okay. Maya studied him with that unsettling wisdom she'd developed since Sarah died. Promise? Promise. She threw her arms around his neck, and Jake held her there in the middle of the grocery store, not caring who saw, just grateful that for once, he could make a promise he actually believed he could keep. Sunday passed in a blur of preparation. Victoria's assistant, A brisk woman named Jennifer had emailed over 50 pages of documentation, employment contracts, non-disclosure agreements, benefits enrollment forms, orientation schedules. Jake read through everything twice, signing where indicated, his hand cramping by the end. The health insurance forms alone were overwhelming. Premium plans, prescription coverage, dental and vision included. Maya's asthma medications would cost $15 instead of $247. The difference felt obscene. Sunday evening, Jake laid out the clothes he'd wear tomorrow. He didn't own a suit, had never needed one, but he had dress pants and a button-down shirt that would have to do until he figured out the dress code. He polished his only pair of dress shoes, the ones he'd worn to Sarah's funeral, trying not to think about that day. Maya appeared in his doorway, her unicorn blanket trailing behind her. "Can't sleep?" Jake asked. She shook her head and climbed onto his bed, tucking herself against his side. "Are you nervous about tomorrow?" "A little," he admitted. "It's a big change." "Will you still be you?" The question caught him off guard. "What do you mean?" "Mom used to say that some people change when they get important jobs. They forget where they came from." Maya's voice was small. "Will you forget about me?" Jake's heart cracked. He pulled her closer, pressing his lips to the top of her head. "Never. Not ever. You're the reason I'm doing this, Maya. Everything, all of it, is for you." "Okay." She was quiet for a moment. "I miss Mom." "Me too, baby. Every day." "Do you think she'd be proud of you?" Jake had to swallow hard before answering. "I hope so. I'm trying to be the man she thought I was." They fell asleep like that, Jake still in his clothes, Maya curled against him, both of them holding on to each other in the darkness like survivors of a shipwreck finally reaching shore. Monday morning arrived with the weight of beginnings. Jake was up at 5:30, showered and dressed by 6. Maya woke to the smell of actual bacon, not the turkey substitute, but real bacon, and scrambled eggs made with butter instead of cooking spray. "This is fancy," she said, climbing into her chair. "New job, new traditions?" Jake set a plate in front of her, then poured orange juice. Not from concentrate, the expensive kind. "Dad, you're acting weird." Good weird or bad weird? She considered this seriously. Good weird, but still weird. At 7:15, they walked to the bus stop together. The autumn air carried a chill that promised winter, and Jake made a mental note to get Maya a new coat. Her current one was 2 sizes too small, the cuffs riding up her wrists. The bus arrived and Maya climbed aboard, pausing at the top step to wave. Jake waved back, watching until the bus disappeared, then returned to the apartment to wait. Victoria's assistant had arranged for a car service to pick him up at 8:30. Jake stood by the window, watching the street, feeling increasingly ridiculous. He didn't belong in car services and corporate offices. He belonged on steel beams and construction sites, where the rules made sense and hard work meant something concrete. At exactly 8:30, a black sedan pulled up. The driver, a middle-aged man in a neat suit, stepped out and looked directly at Jake's third-floor window. Jake grabbed his jacket and headed down. "Mr. Lawson?" The driver opened the rear door. "I'm Marcus. I'll be your driver this morning." "I can drive myself," Jake said. "I have a truck." Ms. Hale's instructions were very specific. "Please, sir." Jake climbed into the back seat, feeling like an imposter. The leather seats were nicer than his couch. The car smelled like expensive cologne and new money. Marcus pulled into traffic with the ease of someone who'd navigated Chicago's streets for decades. "First day?" Marcus asked, glancing in the rearview mirror. "That obvious?" "You've got the look. Don't worry. Everyone's nervous their first day, even the big shots." Marcus merged onto Lakeshore Drive, the city skyline rising ahead of them like a promise or a threat. "Ms. Hale's good people, though. Tough, but fair. You'll do fine." Jake wasn't sure if he believed that, but he appreciated the effort. Apex Construction's headquarters occupied 15 floors of a gleaming tower in the Loop. Marcus pulled up to the main entrance, where a doorman in a burgundy uniform stood ready. "15th floor," Marcus said as Jake climbed out. "Executive offices. They're expecting you." Jake nodded his thanks and entered the building. The lobby was all marble and chrome, with a reception desk that looked like it belonged in a spaceship. Young professionals in expensive suits moved with purpose, their shoes clicking against the polished floor. Jake felt every eye on him, felt the weight of not belonging pressing down like gravity. He approached the reception desk where a woman with perfect makeup smiled professionally. "I'm Jake Lawson. I have an appointment with Ms. Hale. Yes, we've been expecting you. 15th floor, turn left off the elevator. Jennifer will meet you there." The elevator was glass-walled, offering a view of the city as it climbed. Jake kept his eyes forward, refusing to look down. Heights didn't bother him when he was working, when he had a harness and a job to do. But standing still in a glass box as the ground fell away felt wrong. The elevator chimed at 15. Jake stepped out into a reception area that was all clean lines and expensive art. Jennifer materialized immediately, a woman in her 30s with sharp eyes and sharper efficiency. "Mr. Lawson, perfect timing. Follow me, please." She led him through a maze of corridors, past conference rooms and offices with glass walls. People glanced up as they passed, their curiosity barely concealed. Jake caught fragments of whispered conversations. "That's him? The one who saved her life? Doesn't look like executive material." Jennifer stopped at a door marked Director of Field Safety and opened it. "Your office. I've taken the liberty of setting up the basics. Computer, phone, access cards. Your IT credentials are in the welcome packet on the desk. Ms. Hale wants to see you at 9 for orientation, but you have 30 minutes to settle in." She left before Jake could respond. He stepped into the office slowly, half expecting someone to yell that there'd been a mistake. The office was bigger than his apartment's living room. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a view of the city. A massive desk held 2 monitors, a phone with more buttons than he knew what to do with, and a nameplate that read Jake Lawson, Director of Field Safety. Jake sank into the leather chair and stared at his name in brass letters. 3 days ago, he'd been suspended and broke. Now he had an office with a view and a title that meant something. It didn't feel real. He spent 20 minutes trying to figure out the computer login, eventually succeeding with the temporary password Jennifer had left. His email inbox already had 47 messages, welcome notes, meeting invitations, orientation schedules. Jake scrolled through them, overwhelmed. At 8:55, Jennifer appeared in his doorway. "Ms. Hale is ready for you?" Victoria's office made Jake's look modest by comparison. It occupied the corner of the building, with windows on 2 walls offering panoramic views. The furniture was sleek and modern, the art on the walls probably worth more than Jake would make in a year. Victoria stood by the window, phone pressed to her ear, her bandaged wrist visible beneath her suit sleeve. She saw Jake and held up one finger. "Wait. I don't care what the investors think," she said into the phone. "Safety comes first. If they don't like it, they can find another company to fund." "Yes, I'm aware of the timeline. Then we'll adjust the timeline. What part of safety first is ambiguous?" She hung up without saying goodbye and turned to Jake. "Welcome to corporate politics. Coffee?" "I'm good, thanks." "Sit." She gestured to a chair, then took the one opposite, not behind her desk, but beside him, as equals. "How are you feeling?" "Honestly, completely out of my depth." Victoria smiled. "Good. That means you're paying attention." She pulled out a tablet and tapped the screen. "I'm going to be direct because that's the only way I know how to operate. Your job is simple in concept, difficult in execution. You're going to inspect every active Apex project and identify safety violations. When you find them, and you will find them, you'll document them and report directly to me." "What about the site managers, the project leads?" "They'll hate you." Victoria's tone was matter of fact. "They'll see you as an obstacle, someone who's slowing down their timelines and cutting into their margins. Some will try to intimidate you. Others will try to charm you. A few will try to bribe you. Your job is to ignore all of it and tell me the truth." Did Jake process this? "You're essentially asking me to make enemies. I'm asking you to save lives. If that makes you unpopular, so be it." She leaned forward. "Jake, I'm going to tell you something that very few people know. My husband, Robert, died on one of our sites 5 years ago. A scaffold collapse, similar to what happened to your friend Carlos. The investigation found multiple safety violations that had been ignored because fixing them would have delayed the project. Robert was inspecting the site when it gave way." Her voice remained steady, but Jake saw the grief beneath the professional veneer. The site manager was fired, Victoria continued. 3 supervisors were let go. We paid settlements to Robert's family, my family. But money doesn't bring people back. I swore that day that I'd never let profit override safety again. Then I got busy. I trusted the wrong people. I stopped paying attention. She looked Jake in the eye. That ends now. You're my eyes and ears. Eyes. You're my conscience, and I'm giving you the authority to shut down any project, any time, if you see something that puts workers at risk. That's a lot of power for someone who's never managed anything. You've managed to stay alive for 23 years in one of the most dangerous industries in America. You've managed to raise a daughter alone while working a brutal job. You've managed to maintain your integrity when it would have been easier to look the other way. Victoria stood, extending her hand. I trust you, Jake. The question is, do you trust yourself? Jake stood and shook her hand. I'll do my best. That's all I ask. Now come on. I want to introduce you to the team. The next 4 hours were a whirlwind of names and faces. Victoria led Jake through the executive offices, introducing him to department heads, project managers, and senior staff. Most were polite but distant, clearly uncertain what to make of the former ironworker who'd been catapulted into their ranks. A few were openly skeptical. So you're the new safety czar, said a man named Richard Chen, VP of Operations. His handshake was firm to the point of aggression. No offense, but don't most safety directors have degrees, certifications, management experience? Most safety directors haven't spent 2 decades actually building the things we're supposed to be making safe, Jake replied evenly. Richard's smile didn't reach his eyes. Fair point. Just don't slow us down too much. We've got deadlines. I'll keep that in mind, right after I keep your workers alive. The tension was immediate and obvious. Victoria stepped in smoothly. Jake reports to me, Richard. Any concerns about his methods, you bring them to me directly. Clear? Crystal. Richard walked away, his displeasure evident in every step. He's going to be a problem, Jake said quietly. Most likely, but he's also one of the best project managers in the industry. We need him, which means you need to find a way to work with him, even when he's fighting you. Victoria checked her watch. Lunch is in the executive dining room. Then we're visiting the Morrison Tower site, the one where the collapse happened. I want you to see it firsthand and give me your assessment. Lunch was an exercise in feeling inadequate. The executive dining room was less a cafeteria and more a private restaurant, with white tablecloths and actual waitstaff. Jake sat beside Victoria while department heads discussed quarterly projections and market trends in language that might as well have been foreign. He picked at his salmon, which was excellent but felt wrong somehow, like he didn't deserve food this nice, and tried to follow the conversation. Mostly, he just felt the weight of everyone's curiosity, their judgment, their certainty that he didn't belong. A woman across the table, Sarah Kim, Chief Financial Officer, smiled at him warmly. So Jake, Victoria tells us you have a daughter. How old? 7, Maya. That's a lovely age. Must be hard, balancing work and single parenthood. It is, but we manage. I have twins who just turned 8. If you ever need recommendations for after-school programs or anything, let me know. The transition from blue-collar to executive life can be challenging. Jake wasn't sure if she was being genuinely helpful or subtly condescending, so he just nodded his thanks. After lunch, Victoria's driver took them to the Morrison Tower site. Jake hadn't been back since Friday's rescue, and seeing it now felt surreal. The collapsed scaffolding had been removed, but the damage was still evident. Twisted metal, caution tape, areas marked off-limits. A new site manager met them at the entrance, a woman named Patricia Rodriguez, who looked exhausted but determined. Miss Hale, Mr. Lawson. She shook both their hands. I've been here 72 hours, and I've already found 16 code violations. Tommy Briggs was running this site like a pirate ship. Show us, Victoria said. For the next 2 hours, Patricia walked them through the problems. Improperly secured equipment, inadequate safety gear, electrical systems that should have been replaced months ago, load calculations that were optimistic at best, criminally negligent at worst. Jake's anger grew with each revelation. Carlos was in intensive care because of this. 3 other men were injured, all of it preventable, all of it ignored in the name of keeping to schedule. How do we fix this? Victoria asked him directly. Jake looked around the site, his mind automatically calculating. Shut it down for 2 weeks. Bring in a full safety audit team. Independent, not Apex employees. Replace every piece of equipment that doesn't meet current code. Retrain every worker on proper protocols. And most importantly, he turned to Patricia, you need a safety officer on site at all times with the authority to halt work if they see violations. That's going to cost millions, Patricia said, and push our completion date back by at least a month. What's the alternative? Jake asked. Wait for another collapse? Another person in the ICU? Victoria didn't hesitate. Do it. All of it. I'll handle the investors. They spent another hour on site, Jake taking notes and photos, Patricia coordinating with her team. As they were leaving, a familiar voice called out. Well, well, the hero returns. Jake turned to see Tommy Briggs standing by the entrance, his face flushed with anger or alcohol or both. He wasn't supposed to be here. He'd been fired, but clearly no one had enforced the ban yet. Tommy? Victoria's voice went cold. You're trespassing. Leave immediately or I'll have security remove you. I just wanted to congratulate Lawson here on his meteoric rise. Saves your life and suddenly he's management? Must be nice having friends in high places. You need to leave, Jake said quietly. Or what? You'll tackle me too? Tommy stepped closer and Jake could smell the whiskey on his breath. You think you're better than me? You think your sob story about your dead wife makes you special? Jake's hands clenched, but Victoria stepped between them. Mr. Briggs, you have 10 seconds to leave this property before I call the police. And if you ever speak about Mr. Lawson's wife again, I'll personally ensure you never work in this industry anywhere. Something in her tone finally penetrated Tommy's drunken bravado. He backed away, muttering curses, and disappeared into the parking lot. Jake's heart was pounding. Sorry, you should have nothing. He's a bitter man trying to drag you down because he can't stand that you succeeded where he failed. Victoria headed for the car. Come on, I want to show you something. They drove for 20 minutes, heading northwest out of downtown, until Marcus pulled up to a cemetery. Jake recognized it immediately, St. Mary's, where Sarah was buried, where he'd stood 4 months ago and watched them lower her into the ground while Maya held his hand and tried to understand why Mommy wasn't coming home. Why are we here? Jake asked, his voice tight. Victoria didn't answer. She just got out and walked through the gates. Jake followed, his chest constricting with each step until they stood before a marble headstone. Robert James Hale, beloved husband, father, builder. 1965-2020. He's buried 3 rows from your wife, Victoria said softly. I saw her name when I visited last month, Sarah Lawson. That's when I started connecting pieces, the widowed worker with safety concerns, the address in the personnel files. I looked you up. Jake felt exposed, violated. You investigated me. I did my homework. And what I found was a man who'd lost everything but kept showing up, kept fighting for what was right, even when it cost him. She knelt and brushed leaves from Robert's headstone. My husband died because people didn't speak up. You spoke up. That's why you're here, Jake. Not because you saved my life, though I'm grateful for that, but because you represent what this company used to be, what it needs to be again. They stood in silence for a long moment, 2 people united by grief and construction and the weight of trying to make meaning from loss. I miss him every day, Victoria said, but I don't honor his memory by being safe. I honor it by making sure no one else loses someone the way we did. She stood, meeting Jake's eyes. That's what you're doing now. Honoring Sarah, protecting Maya, building something that matters. Jake couldn't speak. He nodded, his throat too tight for words. They returned to the car and headed back downtown. Jake spent the drive staring out the window, thinking about Sarah, about the promises he'd made at her graveside, about the impossible second chance he'd been given. The rest of Monday passed in meetings and paperwork. Jake signed more documents, met more people, tried to absorb more information than his brain could process. By the time Marcus drove him home at 6:30, Jake was exhausted in a completely different way than construction work had ever tired him. Maya was waiting on the couch, doing homework with Mrs. Chen from next door, who'd agreed to watch her after school for a few hours each day. Dad! Maya launched herself at him. How was it? Are you important now? Jake laughed, catching her. I don't know about important, but it was different. Mrs. Chen gathered her things. She was good as gold, had her medicine, did her reading homework. Thank you, Mrs. Chen. I'll see you tomorrow. After she left, Maya demanded a full report. Jake told her about the office, the view, the fancy lunch, leaving out Tommy's drunken confrontation and the cemetery visit. She listened with wide eyes, asking a million questions. So we're rich now? She asked finally. We're going to be okay, Jake corrected. That's different than rich. But yes, sweetheart, we're going to be okay. They ordered pizza, the good kind with actual toppings, and ate on the couch while watching cartoons. Normal things, safe things. But underneath it all, Jake felt the shift happening. His life had pivoted, and there was no going back to who he'd been on Friday morning. That night, after Maya was asleep, Jake sat at the kitchen table and composed an email to Victoria. Thank you for today. For the opportunity, the trust, and the visit to the cemetery. I won't let you down. I won't let any of them down. He hit send before he could second-guess himself, then checked his phone. He had a missed call from Northwestern Memorial. Jake's heart jumped. Carlos. He called back immediately, navigating the hospital's phone tree until he reached the ICU nurses' station. I'm calling about Carlos Mendez, Jake said. I'm a friend. Is there any update? Are you family? No, but... I'm sorry, sir. We can only release information to immediate family. Jake almost hung up, but something made him push. Please, he doesn't have much family. His mother's name is Rosa. She cleans houses. His brother Diego needs surgery. Carlos was hurt on my watch at my site. I just need to know if he's going to make it. There was a long pause. Then, he's stable. Still critical, but stable. The doctors are cautiously optimistic. Relief flooded through Jake. Thank you. God, thank you. He hung up and sat in the darkness of his kitchen, thinking about Carlos lying in that hospital bed, about all the other workers who'd been hurt or killed because people like Tommy Briggs cut corners and men like the old Jake Lawson didn't have the power to stop them. But he had power now. Authority. The ability to actually change things. The question was whether he'd be strong enough to use it. Jake's phone buzzed, an email from Victoria, responding to his message. You already haven't let us down. Get some rest. Tomorrow we visit 3 more sites, and I guarantee you're going to find problems. Steel yourself. This job won't make you popular, but it will make a difference. That's what matters. Jake read it twice, then looked around his apartment. The same cracked walls, the same secondhand furniture. But somehow it all looked different now. Like he was seeing it from the outside, already becoming someone else. He thought about Maya sleeping in the next room, about the medicine that would keep her breathing, about the future that had seemed impossible just days ago. Then he thought about Sarah, about standing at her grave and promising to take care of their daughter, to be the man she'd believed he could be. Maybe this was how he kept that promise. Not just by surviving, but by becoming someone who could protect others the way he'd failed to protect her. Jake pulled out his laptop and started a spreadsheet. Every Apex construction site he knew about, categorized by priority, with columns for safety concerns and inspection schedules. He worked until after midnight, building the framework for how he'd approach this impossible job, making plans that felt both presumptuous and necessary. When he finally collapsed into bed, his last thought was of Victoria's words at the cemetery. You represent what this company used to be, what it needs to be again. Jake fell asleep hoping that was true, that he could somehow be equal to the faith she'd placed in him. Outside, the city hummed with midnight life, sirens and voices, and the distant rumble of trains. Somewhere in that vast darkness, people were building things, risking their lives on steel and concrete, trusting that someone was looking out for their safety. Now that someone was Jake Lawson. And he had no intention of letting them down. The first 3 weeks passed in a blur of discovery and confrontation. Jake spent his days visiting construction sites across Chicago, his trained eye spotting violations that had become invisible to people who'd learned not to see them. Every morning, Marcus drove him to a different project: residential towers, commercial complexes, infrastructure renovations. And every evening, Jake returned to headquarters with documentation that made Victoria's face grow harder and her resolve stronger. He found workers without proper harnesses at the Riverside Plaza project. discovered faulty welding at the Harper Street renovation that would have failed inspection if anyone had bothered to inspect it. Documented electrical systems at the lakefront towers that were one rainstorm away from electrocuting someone. Each violation went into his reports, each report landed on Victoria's desk, and each time she backed him completely. But backing came with consequences. "You're making enemies," Jennifer told him one morning as she delivered his coffee. She'd started doing that, bringing him coffee, straightening his office, treating him like he mattered. Jake still wasn't used to it. "Richard Chen's been complaining to anyone who'll listen that you're costing the company millions in delays." "Good," Jake said, reviewing photos from yesterday's site visit. "Maybe that means I'm doing my job." "Maybe. But watch your back. Richard has friends on the board, and not all of them are happy about Victoria's new safety crusade." Jake looked up from his computer. "Are you warning me or threatening me?" Jennifer smiled. "Warning. I like you, Jake. You're one of the few people in this building who treats me like a human instead of a glorified secretary. But you need to understand the game you're playing. This isn't just about safety. It's about power, money, and people who don't like being told they're wrong." She left before Jake could respond. He sat back in his chair, staring at the city beyond his windows. 3 weeks in this world, and he was still figuring out the rules. On construction sites, everything was clear. Steel held or it didn't, welds passed inspection or they failed, safety protocols either existed or they didn't. But here, in the corporate atmosphere where he still felt like an intruder, truth seemed negotiable and power flowed through channels he didn't fully understand. His phone buzzed, Victoria's assistant. "Ms. Hale needs you in the conference room, now." Jake grabbed his tablet and headed down the hall. The conference room was already full. Victoria at the head of the table, Richard Chen to her right, Sarah Kim and 3 other executives he recognized but couldn't name filling the other seats. The tension was immediate and obvious. "Jake, sit." Victoria gestured to the empty chair beside her. "We're discussing the Harbor Point project. Richard has concerns about your latest report." Richard leaned forward, his expression carefully controlled. "Concerns is putting it mildly. You've recommended shutting down the entire site for 2 weeks. Do you have any idea what that costs? We're talking about $3 million in delays, penalty clauses with the client, and potential damage to our reputation." Jake opened his tablet and pulled up his photos. "I documented 47 separate safety violations at Harbor Point. The crane rigging is compromised, the fall protection systems are inadequate, and someone's been using substandard materials that don't match the engineering specifications. If we don't shut it down, someone's going to die." "That's speculation," Richard shot back. "You're catastrophizing to justify your position." "I'm reading the evidence. The crane inspection certifications are falsified. I checked with the vendor directly. The materials I tested came back 30% weaker than spec. And I personally watched 3 workers operating without proper safety gear while their supervisor looked the other way." Jake met Richard's glare without flinching. "This isn't speculation, it's documentation." Sarah Kim spoke up, her voice measured. "Jake, we appreciate your thoroughness, but there has to be a middle ground. Can we address the critical issues without a complete shutdown? Stage the repairs while work continues in safe areas?" "Not without risking lives. The crane services the entire site. The material problem affects multiple structural elements, and the culture of ignoring safety, that's systemic. You can't fix that with half measures." Richard's jaw tightened. "This is exactly the problem. You've been here 3 weeks, and suddenly you're an expert on project management, on cost-benefit analysis? You're a glorified inspector who got lucky." "Richard," Victoria's voice cut through the room like a blade. "Jake reports to me, and I trust his judgment. If he says the site needs to shut down, it shuts down." "Victoria, be reasonable. We can't what? Prioritize human lives over profit margins?" "That's exactly what we're going to do. Jake, send your full report to all site managers by end of day. Richard, you'll coordinate the shutdown for tomorrow morning. I'll handle the client personally." Richard stood abruptly. "This is a mistake. You're letting sentiment cloud your judgment, and it's going to cost us. Not just money, credibility, contracts, relationships we've built over decades." He looked at Jake with barely concealed contempt. "And all because you feel guilty about your husband and think this guy's some kind of moral compass." The room went silent. Victoria's expression didn't change, but Jake saw something dangerous flash in her eyes. "Get out," she said quietly. "Victoria, out, now. Before I say something we'll both regret." Richard left, his exit sharp with rage. The other executives exchanged uncomfortable glances. Sarah Kim cleared her throat. "I'll coordinate with legal on the client communications. Jake, can you prepare a presentation for the board meeting next week? They're going to want details on all the shutdowns and remediation costs." "Of course." The meeting dissolved, executives filing out in uncomfortable silence. Victoria remained seated, staring at the table. Jake hesitated. "I'm sorry," he said. "I didn't mean to cause—" "Stop." Victoria looked up, and her expression was steel. "You did nothing wrong. Richard's been fighting me on safety improvements since day one. This was inevitable." She stood, gathering her things. "But Jake? He's right about one thing. This is costing us. Money, relationships, board support. I can handle it, but you need to understand that every shutdown, every delay, every cost overrun makes my position weaker and yours more vulnerable. Are you saying I should compromise? I'm saying you should be aware of the stakes, and you should know that not everyone in this company wants you to succeed." She paused at the door. "Be careful. People like Richard don't fight fair when they feel threatened." Jake spent the rest of the afternoon preparing his report, documenting everything in painful detail. Photos, measurements, witness statements from workers who'd been too afraid to speak up before. By 6 o'clock, his eyes burned from staring at screens, and his head throbbed with the weight of it all. His phone rang. Maya's school. His chest tightened automatically. "Mr. Lawson, this is Mrs. Patterson. Maya's fine, but I wanted to update you on her pulmonology appointment tomorrow. I know you have it scheduled for 2 p.m. "Right. I've already cleared my afternoon." "Good. Because, Jake, I'm going to be honest. These past 3 weeks, Maya's been so much better. The new medication, the reduced stress, the stability, it's made a real difference. She's been participating more in class, playing with friends at recess. She seems happy." Something in Jake's chest loosened. "Thank you for telling me that." "You're doing a good job, Jake. I know it hasn't been easy, but you're doing right by that little girl." After they hung up, Jake sat quietly for a moment, letting himself feel something other than stress and vigilance. Maya was better. They had stability. The fear that had colored every moment for 4 months was finally starting to recede. His computer chimed. New email from Victoria. "Board meeting moved up to Friday. You'll need to present your findings on all current sites. Prepare for hostile questions. They're not happy about the costs." Jake sighed and pulled up his presentation file. 4 days to prepare a defense of decisions that should have been obvious. 4 days to justify keeping people alive. The week accelerated from there. Tuesday brought another site visit, this time to the Westside Medical Center expansion. Jake found more problems: inadequate scaffolding anchors, missing safety railings, workers operating equipment without proper certification. He documented everything, filed his report, and watched as Victoria ordered another shutdown. "That's 5 projects now," Jennifer said, updating his calendar. "The board's not going to like this." "The board can't audit my findings." "No, but they can fire Victoria. And if she goes, where does that leave you?" Jake hadn't considered that possibility. He'd been so focused on doing the job right that he hadn't thought about the political fallout. But Jennifer was right. Every shutdown, every cost overrun, every delay made Victoria's position more precarious. And if she fell, he'd fall with her. Wednesday brought Maya's pulmonologist appointment. Jake left work early, picking her up from school personally. They drove to Northwestern Memorial, the same hospital where Carlos was still recovering. And Jake tried not to think about what might have happened if that suspension hadn't become a firing. If Victoria hadn't offered him this chance, if he'd still been scrambling to afford even basic care. Dr. Patricia Okonkwo was a woman in her 40s with warm eyes and an accent that suggested Nigerian heritage. She spent an hour with Maya, running tests, asking questions, listening to her breathing with the kind of attention that made Jake want to weep with gratitude. "Her asthma is well controlled now," Dr. Okonkwo said after the exam. "The maintenance medication is working beautifully, but I want to run some additional tests. allergy panels, lung function monitoring, just to make sure we're not missing any triggers. Whatever she needs, Jake said. Cost isn't... He caught himself, still not used to saying it. We have good insurance now. Dr. Okonkwo smiled. I saw that in her file. The change from your previous coverage is significant. She pulled up something on her computer. Mr. Lawson, I'm going to be honest. When I reviewed Maya's medical history, I saw months of undertreated asthma, missed appointments, gaps in medication. That pattern typically indicates financial hardship. The fact that you're here now, with comprehensive coverage, getting her the care she needs, that takes courage. A lot of parents in your situation give up or fall through the cracks. I almost did, Jake admitted, but I got lucky. Luck had nothing to do with it. You fought for your daughter. That matters. She handed him a prescription. I'm adjusting her maintenance dose slightly and adding an emergency rescue inhaler to keep at school. Schedule a follow-up in 6 weeks and call immediately if she has any severe episodes. They left the hospital, Maya clutching a sticker Dr. Okonkwo had given her, a cartoon lung with a smiley face. Jake found himself standing in the lobby, just breathing, letting the relief wash over him. His daughter was going to be okay. They were going to be okay. Dad? Maya tugged his hand. Can we visit Carlos? Jake looked toward the elevators leading to the ICU. He'd been avoiding it, afraid of what he'd find, afraid of his own guilt. But Maya's eyes were hopeful, and he couldn't say no. They took the elevator to the 8th floor. The ICU nurses' station looked different in daylight. Less intimidating, more human. Jake approached the desk. I'm here to see Carlos Mendez. I know I'm not family, but... Jake? A woman's voice, heavily accented, tired but warm. Rosa Mendez appeared from one of the rooms, her cleaning uniform replaced by worn jeans and a sweater. Jake Lawson? Mrs. Mendez, I'm so sorry. I should have come sooner. She crossed the distance and hugged him, hard. Carlos told me what you did, how you tried to protect him, how you fought that terrible man. She pulled back, tears in her eyes. He's awake now, asking about you. Relief and guilt warred in Jake's chest. Can I see him? Please, he'll be so happy. Carlos's room was small and sterile, machines beeping quietly, tubes and wires connecting him to systems keeping him alive. But his eyes were open, and when he saw Jake, he managed a weak smile. Hey, boss man. His voice was rough, damaged. Heard you got promoted. Jake moved to the bedside, Maya hanging back shyly. Carlos, Christ, I'm sorry. If I'd been there, if I'd checked that scaffolding again. Stop. Carlos coughed, wincing. Tommy showed me the inspection logs after you left. He changed them, made it look like that section was never checked. Wasn't your fault. The words hit Jake like a fist. He falsified the logs? Yeah, I wanted to rush the job, cut corners. When I called him on it, he told me to keep my mouth shut or I'd end up like you, fired and broke. Carlos's expression hardened. Then the scaffolding gave way, and here I am. Jake's hands clenched. Did you tell the police this? Told Detective Chen everything yesterday. He's building a criminal case now. Fraud, reckless endangerment, maybe even attempted manslaughter. Carlos managed a grin. Tommy's going down, Jake, and you're part of making it happen. I should have done more. Should have pushed harder. You did what you could with what you had. Now you got power. Use it. Carlos's eyes drifted to Maya. That your daughter? Yeah, Maya, come say hi. Maya approached carefully, staring at all the medical equipment. Does it hurt? Sometimes, Carlos admitted, but I'm getting better. Your dad's a hero, you know, not just for saving that fancy lady, for giving guys like me a voice. They stayed for 20 minutes, talking carefully around the painful subjects, focusing instead on Carlos's recovery timeline and his plans for physical therapy. Rosa brought coffee for Jake and juice for Maya, her gratitude expressed in constant small gestures, straightening his collar, squeezing his hand, calling him mijo, like he was her own son. When they finally left, Maya was quiet in the elevator. Dad, is Carlos going to be okay? I think so, baby. It'll take time, but yeah, he'll be okay. Good. She was silent for a moment. Dad, I'm proud of you. Jake's throat closed up. He knelt down, pulling Maya into a hug right there in the hospital lobby, not caring who saw. I'm proud of you too, he managed. Every single day. Thursday brought preparation for tomorrow's board meeting. Jake spent 10 hours building his presentation, anticipating every question, reinforcing every finding with data. Jennifer helped, her corporate experience invaluable in translating his field observations into language that would resonate with executives. Don't let them bully you, she said as they worked late into the evening. Richard's going to try to discredit you, paint you as inexperienced, emotional, incapable of seeing the big picture. Stay calm, stick to facts, and remember that Victoria's got your back. What if that's not enough? What if they override her? Then we all start looking for new jobs. Jennifer's smile was grim. But that's not going to happen. Victoria Hale didn't build this company by backing down from fights. She's been quiet for 5 years, grieving and letting others run things. But you woke something up in her. She's fighting again, and when Victoria fights, she usually wins. Jake hoped that was true. Friday morning arrived too quickly. Jake dressed in his best suit, still not as expensive as what everyone else wore, but respectable. Marcus drove him in early, and he spent an hour reviewing his notes one last time. At 9 o'clock sharp, Victoria's assistant called. They're ready for you. The boardroom occupied the entire 16th floor, a massive space with a table that could seat 30 and windows offering a 360-degree view of Chicago. 12 board members sat in high-backed leather chairs, their expressions ranging from curious to hostile. Victoria sat at the head of the table, her posture perfect, her face revealing nothing. Richard Chen sat to her left, and the look he gave Jake was pure venom. Members of the board, Victoria began. As you know, 3 weeks ago, I appointed Jake Lawson as our new Director of Field Safety. Since then, he's conducted comprehensive audits of all active Apex projects. What he found was disturbing, and I asked him here today to present his findings directly. Jake? Jake stood, clicked his remote, and the first slide appeared on the massive screen, photos of the Morrison Tower collapse. 3 men were critically injured when this scaffolding failed, Jake began, his voice steady despite the nervousness churning in his gut. The investigation revealed 47 separate safety violations at that site alone, ranging from falsified inspection records to the use of substandard materials. Similar patterns exist across multiple projects. He clicked through slides. Harbor Point, Westside Medical, Riverside Plaza, each one documenting violations, each one showing the human cost of negligence. Board members leaned forward, some taking notes, others whispering to each other. In total, Jake continued, I've identified over 300 violations across 12 active sites. 5 projects have been temporarily shut down for remediation. Costs for these shutdowns and repairs total approximately $17 million. A gray-haired man at the far end of the table, Thomas Brennan, board chairman, spoke up. $17 million. That's a significant hit to this quarter's earnings. Can you justify that cost? Can we justify the cost of not fixing these problems? Jake countered. Carlos Mendez is 24 years old. He'll need months of physical therapy to walk again. His medical bills will exceed $2 million. If we'd prevented that collapse, if we'd caught these violations earlier, we'd have saved money and saved Carlos from permanent injury. One incident, Richard interjected. You're extrapolating from one incident to justify wholesale disruption of our operations. It's not one incident, Jake pulled up another slide. A list of accidents over the past 5 years. 17 workers injured seriously enough to require hospitalization. 3 fatalities. Dozens of minor injuries that went unreported because workers were afraid of retaliation. This isn't an anomaly, it's a pattern. A pattern you're claiming exists based on 3 weeks of observation? Richard's tone was dismissive. Mr. Brennan, members of the board, with all due respect to Mr. Lawson's heroism in saving Ms. Hale's life, he lacks the experience and perspective to make these kinds of sweeping judgments. He's approaching this emotionally, not analytically. I'm approaching this as someone who's actually built things, Jake shot back. I've spent 23 years on construction sites. I know what safe looks like, and I know what negligence looks like. What I found isn't emotional. It's factual, documented, and dangerous. Dangerous to workers or dangerous to our profit margins, Richard pressed. Because from where I sit, you're using safety as a weapon to justify your position and Victoria's guilt over her husband's death. The room went deadly quiet. Victoria's expression didn't change, but Jake saw her hands tighten on the armrests of her chair. "That's out of line, Richard," Thomas Brennan said quietly. "Is it? We all know Victoria's judgment has been compromised since Robert died. She's let her guilt drive decision-making that should be based on data and financial analysis. Now she's brought in someone with no management experience, given him unprecedented authority, and we're supposed to just accept that $17 million in losses is justified? It's not a loss if it prevents lawsuits, criminal charges, and death," Jake said, his voice hard. "Tommy Briggs falsified safety records. He used materials he knew were substandard. He intimidated workers into silence, and if you'd been paying attention instead of prioritizing profit, you'd have known that months ago." "How dare you?" "Enough!" Victoria stood, and the room fell silent. "Richard, you're right about one thing. My judgment was compromised. For 5 years, I let grief keep me passive. I trusted the wrong people. I looked the other way while our safety standards eroded. But Jake didn't just save my life. He reminded me what this company was built on: integrity, quality, the belief that the people who build our projects deserve to go home safe at the end of their shifts." She walked around the table, placing a folder in front of Thomas Brennan. "That contains Detective Chen's criminal investigation findings. Tommy Briggs is being charged with fraud, reckless endangerment, and obstruction of justice. 2 other site managers are under investigation. If we'd continued operating the way Richard wants, we'd be facing massive criminal liability. Jake's shutdowns didn't cost us $17 million. They saved us from bankruptcy and potential prison time." Thomas opened the folder, his expression darkening as he read. Other board members leaned in, passing pages between them. "Jesus," someone muttered. "This is worse than we thought." "So here's what's going to happen," Victoria continued. "Jake's recommendations will be implemented immediately and completely. We're hiring an independent safety firm to audit every Apex project, past and present. We're establishing a whistleblower program so workers can report violations without fear, and we're implementing quarterly safety reviews that will be presented directly to this board." "Victoria," Richard stood, "you can't unilaterally." "I'm not. I'm asking the board to vote. All in favor of comprehensive safety reform, regardless of short-term costs, say aye." The vote was 9-3. Richard's face went purple. "This is a mistake. You're all making a massive mistake." "Then you're welcome to resign," Victoria said coldly. "But if you stay, you'll support these changes fully. Am I clear?" Richard grabbed his things and stormed out. 2 other board members followed him, allies, presumably. The remaining members looked shaken but resolute. Thomas Brennan stood and extended his hand to Jake. "Mr. Lawson, on behalf of this board, thank you. I apologize for Richard's behavior. He's been protecting his own projects and his own reputation at the expense of everything else." Jake shook his hand, still processing what had just happened. The meeting continued for another hour, board members asking detailed questions about implementation timelines, costs, and procedures. Jake answered each one methodically, feeling more confident as he went. These people weren't his enemies. They were executives trying to do right by a company that had lost its way. By the time the meeting ended, Jake was exhausted but cautiously optimistic. Victoria walked him back to his office. "You did well in there," she said. "Better than well. You stood your ground against Richard, defended your work with facts, and didn't let anyone intimidate you. Richard's not going to let this go. No, he's not. But he's weaker now, and I'm stronger. The board backing these reforms publicly means they can't quietly undermine them later." She paused at his office door. "Jake, I want you to understand something. What you're doing here, it matters. Not just for Apex, but for the entire industry. If we can prove that safety doesn't have to compromise profit, other companies will follow. You're not just protecting our workers, you're changing the standard." "I'm just trying not to screw up." Victoria smiled. "That's exactly the attitude that makes you right for this job. The moment you start thinking you know, everything is the moment you become dangerous." She checked her watch. "Go home. Spend the weekend with your daughter. Monday brings new challenges, but you've earned some rest." Jake gathered his things and headed down to where Marcus waited. The drive home felt different somehow, less like escape, more like completion. He'd survived his first major test. The board had backed him. Richard's influence was diminished. Maybe he really could do this. Maya was waiting when he got home, homework already done, dinner made by Mrs. Chen warming on the stove. She launched herself at Jake the moment he walked in. "Dad, how was your big meeting?" "Stressful, but good, I think." He hugged her tight. "How was school?" "Sophie invited me to her birthday party next week. Can I go, please?" "Of course you can go. We'll get her a nice present." They ate dinner together, talking about nothing and everything. Maya's science project on volcanoes, the boy in her class who'd gotten in trouble for putting glue in another kid's hair, the book she was reading about a girl who could talk to animals. Normal kid stuff, safe stuff. The kind of conversations Jake had been too stressed to really hear for months, but could finally appreciate now. After Maya went to bed, Jake sat on the couch with his laptop, reviewing the week's work. 5 shutdowns, 300 documented violations, 17 million in costs that would ultimately save lives and protect the company from catastrophic legal liability. His phone buzzed, a text from Carlos. "Heard you crushed it at the board meeting. Proud of you, man. Keep fighting. Us up." Jake smiled and texted back. "Couldn't have done it without your statement. You gave me ammunition." "We gave each other ammunition. That's how this works." Jake set down his phone and stared at the ceiling, thinking about the strange journey that had brought him here. 3 weeks ago, he'd been fired and desperate. Now he was director of field safety for a major construction company with the power to actually change things. It still didn't feel real. But maybe that was okay. Maybe feeling like an imposter kept him humble, kept him focused on doing the work instead of enjoying the title. His phone rang. Victoria. "Sorry to call so late," she said, "but I wanted you to hear this from me first. The board just voted to give you a discretionary budget of $500,000 for safety improvements across all sites. You have full authority to deploy it however you see fit." Jake sat up straight. $500,000. Use it wisely. Hire consultants if you need them. Upgrade equipment. Whatever it takes to bring our safety standards above industry baseline. The board wants quarterly reports, but otherwise, the decisions are yours. After they hung up, Jake sat in the darkness of his living room, holding his phone, trying to process the responsibility he'd just been given. $500,000. The power to reshape an entire company's safety culture. The trust of people who barely knew him. It was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. Jake opened his laptop and started making notes, a wish list of improvements he'd been documenting for weeks. Better equipment, comprehensive training programs, third-party audits, a whistleblower hotline that actually worked, programs to support injured workers and their families. He worked until after midnight, building plans that felt both ambitious and essential. Outside, the city slept and woke and lived its million individual lives, unaware that in apartment 3C, a former ironworker was trying to figure out how to save an industry one decision at a time. When Jake finally closed his laptop and headed to bed, his last thought was of Sarah. He wondered what she'd think of all this. Her blue-collar husband in a corporate office, making decisions that affected hundreds of lives, becoming someone neither of them had ever imagined. He hoped she'd be proud. He hoped he was doing right by Maya, by Carlos, by every worker who trusted that someone was looking out for them. Most of all, he hoped he wouldn't screw it up, because now people were counting on him. And Jake Lawson had never been very good at letting people down. The weekend came and went too quickly, filled with Maya's laughter and a normalcy that still felt fragile, like something that could shatter if Jake stopped paying attention. But Monday arrived as Mondays do, dragging him back into the corporate world where he was still learning to navigate waters that ran deeper and darker than he'd initially understood. The text came at 7 in the morning, before Jake had even finished his coffee. It was from Jennifer. "Don't come to the office. Meet Victoria at the Morrison Tower site. Something's happened." Jake's stomach dropped. He called immediately, but Jennifer didn't answer. He tried Victoria, same result. Whatever had happened, it was bad enough that no one wanted to explain it over the phone. He dropped Maya at school early, promising Mrs. Chen he'd be back before pickup time, then drove to Morrison Tower with his heart hammering against his ribs. The site looked different from a distance, more vehicles than usual, including 2 police cars and what looked like a news van. Jake parked and approached the gate, where a security guard he didn't recognize stopped him. "Site's closed. No entry. I'm Jake Lawson, Director of Field Safety. Victoria Hale asked me to meet her here. The guard checked his clipboard, nodded, and waved him through. She's up on 48 with the police. Jake's chest tightened. 48, the same floor where the scaffolding had collapsed, where Carlos had been injured. He took the construction elevator up, each floor adding weight to the dread pooling in his gut. Victoria stood near the edge of the building, talking with Detective Chen and Patricia Rodriguez, the site manager. Her expression was carved from stone, and when she saw Jake, something in her eyes made him think of battlefields. "What happened?" Jake asked as he approached. Detective Chen answered. "Sabotage. Someone cut through support cables on the crane overnight. If Patricia's crew had started work this morning without checking, the whole thing would have come down. Could have killed a dozen people." The words hit Jake like a physical blow. Sabotage? Who would... "We're investigating," Chen said. "But given the pattern of problems at this site and your recent board presentation highlighting these issues, we're treating this as potentially connected to your safety reforms." Victoria's voice was ice. "Someone's sending a message. They don't like what we're doing, and they're willing to kill to stop it." Jake looked at the crane, a massive piece of machinery that loomed over the site like a sleeping giant. The thought of it collapsing, of workers trapped beneath tons of steel, made his blood run cold. "Do you have security footage?" he asked. "Cameras were disabled," Patricia said. "Professionally, like someone knew exactly where they were and how to bypass them. This wasn't random vandalism, this was planned." Detective Chen pulled out his phone and showed Jake a photo of the cut cables. The damage was precise, calculated to fail under load rather than immediately. Whoever did this understood construction, understood equipment, understood exactly how to make death look like an accident. "Richard Chen," Jake said suddenly. "He's got the knowledge, the motive, and he left the board meeting threatening Victoria." "We're aware of Mr. Chen," the detective said carefully. "He's one of several people we're looking at. But I need you to be careful, Mr. Lawson. If someone's willing to sabotage equipment, they might be willing to target you directly. You're the face of these reforms." "I'm not backing down," Jake said immediately. "No one's asking you to, but be aware. Watch your surroundings. Report anything suspicious." Chen handed him a business card. "My direct line, day or night." They spent the next hour documenting everything, taking statements, reviewing site logs. The news van Jake had seen turned out to be from Channel 7, and a reporter was already setting up for a live shot. This was going to go public, and when it did, the pressure on everyone would increase exponentially. Victoria pulled Jake aside as they were preparing to leave. "I'm calling an emergency executive meeting this afternoon. I need you there. We're going to flush out whoever's behind this." "You think it's someone internal?" "I know it is. This level of access, this knowledge of our sites, it's someone close to the operation, and we're going to find them." The meeting was scheduled for 3 p.m. in the main conference room. Jake spent the intervening hours reviewing personnel files, security logs, and project histories, looking for patterns. Jennifer helped, her fingers flying across her keyboard as she pulled up data. "Richard's been texting with Bradley Ward a lot lately," she said, showing Jake her screen. "Ward's the COO. He's been with Apex since the beginning. Him and Robert Hale built the company together." "Victoria's never mentioned him." "Because they don't get along. Ward thought Victoria should sell the company after Robert died. Said she didn't have the stomach for it anymore. She fired him 6 months ago, but apparently he's been staying in touch with Richard and other board members who aren't happy about the safety reforms." Jake studied the text logs Jennifer had pulled up. They were careful, coded, but the subtext was clear. Ward and Richard were working together, undermining Victoria, gathering allies. "Can you get me Ward's employment contract, his termination documents, anything that shows his relationship with current projects?" Jennifer's fingers flew. "Already pulling it. Give me 10 minutes." By 2:30, Jake had a theory. By 2:45, he had evidence. By 3 o'clock, when he walked into the conference room, he had a presentation that was going to detonate like a bomb. The room was full. Victoria, Sarah Kim, Thomas Brennan, and 4 other board members, Patricia Rodriguez, and 3 executives Jake didn't know. Notably absent was Richard Chen. "Where's Richard?" Victoria asked. "In his office," one of the executives said. He said he's not attending any more meetings where that ironworker gets to play detective. Victoria's expression could have cut glass. Then this meeting is about him. Jake, what did you find? Jake pulled up his presentation. After the sabotage this morning, I started looking at access logs, security clearances, and communication patterns. 3 people had the knowledge, access, and motive to sabotage that crane. He clicked to the next slide, showing photos. Tommy Briggs, except he's in jail awaiting trial. Patricia Rodriguez, except she's the one who discovered the sabotage and immediately reported it. And Richard Chen, who has access to all our sites, who's been vocally opposing safety reforms, and who's been in regular contact with Bradley Ward. The room went silent. Ward was fired 6 months ago, Jake continued. But according to financial records Jennifer pulled, he's still receiving consulting fees from several Apex subsidiaries. Fees that Richard approved personally, off the books, buried in miscellaneous expense accounts. In total, Ward's received almost $2 million in the past 6 months. Thomas Brennan leaned forward. For what services? That's the question. The contracts are vague, strategic consulting, industry expertise. But here's what's interesting. Jake pulled up the timeline. Every time I've shut down a project, Ward's received a payment within 24 hours. The day after the board approved my safety budget, Ward got $100,000. And yesterday, the day before the crane was sabotaged, Ward received $50,000 with the memo line, "Problem resolution." Sarah Kim's face went pale. You're saying Richard's been paying Ward to sabotage our own projects? I'm saying the evidence suggests they're working together to undermine safety reforms. Whether that includes sabotage, I don't know. But Detective Chen will want to investigate. This is insane, one of the board members said. Richard's been with us for 15 years. He's protecting projects that have made him millions in bonuses, Jake interrupted. Projects that cut corners, ignore safety protocols, and maximize profit margins. Every shutdown I've ordered has cost Richard personally. He's not just opposed to reforms philosophically, he's opposed because they threaten his income. Victoria stood. Where's Richard now? His office, supposedly, Sarah said. Security, Victoria spoke into her phone. I need you at Richard Chen's office immediately. Detain him if he tries to leave. But they were too late. When security reached Richard's office, it was empty. His computer was gone, his files cleared out, his desk cleaned like he'd never been there. He ran, Thomas Brennan said. That's as good as a confession. Detective Chen arrived within 30 minutes, bringing 2 other detectives and a warrant. They seized Richard's remaining files, interviewed staff, and put out a bolo for both Richard and Bradley Ward. The news spread through the building like wildfire. Whispers in elevators, texts flying between departments, people gathering in break rooms to discuss the drama. Jake found himself at the center of it all, uncomfortable with the attention, but unable to escape it. People he'd never met stopped him in hallways to shake his hand, to thank him, to tell him they'd been afraid to speak up about problems they'd seen. The floodgates had opened, and suddenly everyone had a story about corners cut, safety ignored, workers threatened into silence. By 6 p.m., Jake was exhausted. He retreated to his office, closing the door and just breathing for the first time in hours. His phone buzzed, a text from Maya. Dad, when are you coming home? Mrs. Chen made dumplings and she's teaching me to fold them. Jake smiled, texting back, On my way soon, sweetheart. Save some for me. A knock on his door. Victoria entered without waiting for permission, closing the door behind her. You did it, she said simply. You found them. We don't know they're behind the sabotage yet. But we will. Chen's good at his job, and with the evidence you found, he's got probable cause for everything. She sat down across from Jake, and for the first time since he'd known her, she looked genuinely tired. I should have seen it. Should have known Bradley hadn't let go, that he'd try to undermine everything Robert and I built. You trusted people. That's not a weakness. It is when it puts workers at risk. Victoria was quiet for a moment. Jake, I want you to know something. When I hired you, part of it was gratitude for saving my life. Part of it was guilt about Robert, but mostly it was because I saw something in you that I'd lost. The belief that doing the right thing matters more than being comfortable. You reminded me why we started this company. I'm just trying not to get anyone killed. You're doing more than that. You're changing the culture. The calls we've gotten since news broke about the sabotage. Workers from other sites, reporting problems they've been too afraid to mention. Competitors calling to ask about our whistleblower program, wanting to implement something similar. You've started something bigger than just Apex. Jake didn't know what to say to that. He'd been focused on survival for so long that the idea of starting a movement felt absurd. Go home to your daughter, Victoria said, standing. Tomorrow we're going to have reporters, more police interviews, probably protests from people who think we're overreacting. But tonight, just be a dad. You've earned it. Jake gathered his things and headed down to where Marcus waited. The drive home was quiet, Jake too drained for conversation. When they pulled up to his building, he saw Maya's face in the window, watching for him. The sight made his chest ache with gratitude for simple things. A daughter who waited, a home to return to, a life that made sense outside of corporate warfare. Maya met him at the door, flour on her cheeks, grinning. "Dad, look what I made!" She held up a dumpling, lumpy, misshapen, absolutely perfect. "It's beautiful," Jake said, scooping her into a hug. They ate dinner with Mrs. Chen, who'd made enough dumplings to feed a small army. The conversation was light, normal, blessedly free of sabotage and investigations and corporate politics. After Mrs. Chen left, Jake helped Maya with her homework, read her 3 chapters of her book about the girl who talked to animals and tucked her into bed. "Dad?" Maya said as he was turning off the light. "Are you safe at your job?" The question caught him off guard. "What makes you ask that?" "I heard Mrs. Chen watching the news. They said someone tried to hurt people at your building." Jake sat back down on the edge of her bed. "Someone did something dangerous, yes, but we caught them, and everyone's safe now." "But what if they try again? What if they hurt you?" Jake pulled her close. "I'm being careful, sweetheart. I promise. And there are lots of people making sure everyone stays safe. Police, security, your dad's boss. Nothing's going to happen to me. You promise?" "I promise." It was another lie, or at least a half-truth. He couldn't promise his safety any more than he could have promised Sarah wouldn't die. But children needed certainty, needed to believe their parents were invincible. So Jake made the promise and hoped he could keep it. The next morning brought chaos. The sabotage story had gone national overnight, picked up by major news networks hungry for drama. Jake's phone was flooded with interview requests, which Jennifer fielded with ruthless efficiency. The building was crawling with reporters, forcing security to lock down access. Detective Chen called at 9 a.m. with news. They'd located Bradley Ward in a hotel downtown. When police arrived to question him, they found evidence connecting him to the crane sabotage. Blueprints of the Morrison Tower site, photos of the security camera system, communications with someone who matched Richard's description. Ward was arrested on the spot. Richard Chen was still missing, but Chen assured Jake it was only a matter of time. Men like him don't know how to disappear. They're too used to comfort, too connected to their normal lives. We'll find him. By Wednesday, they had. Richard had been hiding at his brother's house in Milwaukee, apparently convinced he could wait out the investigation. When police arrested him, they found texts on his phone that laid out the entire conspiracy. Ward's resentment of Victoria, Richard's anger about safety reforms costing him bonuses, their plan to sabotage projects to prove the reforms were causing more problems than they solved. "They wanted to make you look incompetent," Detective Chen explained during his visit to Apex headquarters. "Shut down a site for safety, then something catastrophic happens anyway. Makes it look like your reforms don't work, gives the board reason to reverse course and fire you." "That's insane," Jake said. "That's desperation. These men spent their careers building empires on shortcuts and corner cutting. You threatened their entire worldview, not to mention their bank accounts. Desperate men do desperate things." The trial wouldn't happen for months, but the damage to Richard and Ward was immediate and total. Richard was fired from Apex and expelled from the board. Ward faced criminal charges that would likely put him in prison for years. And the construction industry, watching the story unfold, began having uncomfortable conversations about their own practices. Jake found himself in the strange position of being almost famous. Industry magazines wanted interviews. Safety organizations wanted him to speak at conferences. Other companies started implementing Apex-style whistleblower programs and safety audits. He'd become, improbably, a voice for change. "I don't want to be a spokesperson," Jake told Victoria one afternoon as they reviewed yet another speaking invitation. "I just want to do the job." The job includes leading by example. People listen when you talk because you've lived what they're living. You're not some consultant who learned about construction from textbooks. You built things, risked your life, lost your wife to the stress of this industry. That authenticity matters. Victoria paused. "But I understand if you'd rather stay out of the spotlight. You didn't ask for this." Jake thought about Sarah, about the promises he'd made at her grave, about Carlos in physical therapy, learning to walk again, about Maya, finally thriving now that the constant stress had lifted. "I'll do it," he said. "If it helps keep workers safe, I'll do it." Over the next 2 months, Jake spoke at 3 conferences, gave a dozen interviews, and visited sites across the country as a consultant. Apex's safety record improved dramatically, not a single serious injury in 60 days compared to an average of 1 every 2 weeks under the old system. Worker satisfaction scores went up. Productivity, despite the increased safety protocols, actually improved because workers who felt safe worked faster and made fewer mistakes. The financial impact was complex. Short-term costs were significant, the $17 million in shutdowns, plus another $10 million in equipment upgrades and training programs. But insurance premiums dropped, lawsuits dried up, and reputation improvements brought in new clients who specifically wanted to work with a company that prioritized safety. By the end of the quarter, Apex was nearly breaking even on the reforms. "We're proving it's possible," Victoria told the board during their quarterly meeting. "Safety and profitability aren't opposites. They're partners, and it's all because of Jake's work." The board, minus Richard and his 2 allies who'd resigned, gave Jake a standing ovation. He sat through it awkwardly, uncomfortable with praise, still feeling like an imposter in his expensive suit and corner office. But when he visited construction sites now, workers greeted him differently. Not with suspicion or resentment, but with something like hope. They showed him problems without fear of retaliation. They asked questions about safety protocols. They treated him like one of them who'd somehow made it to the other side without forgetting where he came from. Carlos was released from the hospital in late November, moving to a rehabilitation facility where he'd spend months learning to walk again. Jake visited him twice a week, bringing updates from the sites Carlos had worked on, helping him stay connected to the world he'd be returning to eventually. "You're going to work again," Jake promised him during one visit. "Not on the beams. Doctors say that's too risky. But maybe in safety, like me. You've got the experience, the knowledge, and the motivation. I could use someone I trust." Carlos's eyes lit up. "You serious?" "Dead serious. Take your time healing, do your physical therapy, and when you're ready, there's a job waiting for you." "Man," Carlos shook his head, smiling. "6 months ago, I was just another worker. Now I'm going to be management?" "You were never just another worker. You spoke up when it mattered. That's what we need, people who won't stay quiet when they see something wrong." Thanksgiving came, and Jake hosted a small celebration in his apartment. Now a nicer apartment in a better building, thanks to the housing allowance that came with his position. Maya invited Sophie from school. Jake invited Carlos and Rosa. Victoria came too, bringing wine and stories about Robert that made everyone laugh. They ate too much, talked too long, and for a few hours forgot about sabotage and trials and corporate politics. It was just people sharing gratitude for survival, for second chances, for the strange ways life could pivot from disaster to hope. After everyone left and Maya was asleep, Jake stood at his window, looking out at the city. Somewhere out there, construction workers were building through the night, trusting that someone was making sure their equipment was safe, their protocols were sound, their lives were valued. 6 months ago, he'd been one of them, invisible, expendable, one missed paycheck from disaster. Now he was the one they trusted to protect them. The responsibility still terrified him, but it also gave his life a purpose that went beyond mere survival. Sarah would have liked that, he thought. She'd always said he was capable of more than he believed, that his integrity and experience were worth something beyond a paycheck. He'd finally proven her right. December brought the trial, first Ward, then Richard. Jake testified at both, explaining the safety violations, the falsified records, the culture of intimidation that had made the sabotage possible. The juries deliberated for less than a day in each case. Ward got 15 years for sabotage and conspiracy. Richard got 10 for fraud and reckless endangerment. When the verdicts were read, Jake felt no triumph, just a quiet satisfaction that justice had worked, that the system he'd trusted had followed through. Victoria threw a celebration at Apex headquarters, inviting every employee, every worker from every site. Jake stood in the crowd, watching people laugh and dance and celebrate a company that finally matched its stated values. "You did this," Jennifer said, appearing beside him with champagne. "Don't downplay it. You changed everything." "We did this," Jake corrected. "Victoria, you, Patricia, Carlos, every worker who finally felt safe enough to speak up. It wasn't just me. But it started with you, with one man who couldn't stay silent even when it cost him everything." Jennifer clinked her glass against his. "To Jake Lawson, the iron worker who saved a company and didn't even know he was doing it." Jake smiled, took a sip, and looked across the room to where Victoria was talking with Thomas Brennan and other board members. She caught his eye and raised her glass in a private toast. Jake returned the gesture, feeling the weight of everything they'd survived together. His phone buzzed, a text from Maya, who was at Sophie's house for a sleepover. "Dad, Sophie's mom says you're on the news again. You're famous. That's so weird, LOL. Love you." Jake laughed and texted back. "Love you too, baby. See you tomorrow." The party wound down around midnight. Jake caught a ride home with Marcus, who'd become more than just a driver over the past months. He was a friend, a confidant, someone who understood the strangeness of Jake's transformation from blue-collar to white-collar. "You did good, Jake," Marcus said as they pulled up to his building. "Real good. Your daughter should be proud." "She will be," Jake said, "someday when she's old enough to understand what all this meant." He rode the elevator to his floor, the 6th now, in a building with working heat and elevators that didn't smell like despair. His apartment was bigger, nicer, filled with furniture that wasn't from Goodwill. But the unicorn blanket still lived on Maya's bed, and Sarah's photo still sat on the nightstand, and the eviction notice still lived in a drawer as a reminder of how close they'd come to losing everything. Jake collapsed onto his couch, exhausted but content. In 6 months, his entire life had transformed. He'd gone from fired and desperate to director of safety for a major company, from struggling to afford Maya's medicine to having comprehensive insurance and savings in the bank, from powerless to influential. But the transformation that mattered most was simpler. He'd gone from surviving to living, from drowning to breathing, from a man trying not to fail to a man actually succeeding at something that mattered. His phone rang one last time. Victoria. "Sorry to call so late," she said, "but I wanted you to hear this from me first. The board just voted unanimously to offer you a promotion. Vice President of Safety and Compliance, overseeing not just Apex, but consulting for other companies we partner with. Substantial raise, expanded team, bigger budget. You'd be building a department from scratch, setting industry standards." Jake was quiet for a long moment. "That's a lot of responsibility." "It is, and you've earned it. But Jake, I'll understand if you say no. If you want to stay in your current role, keep things manageable, focus on Maya. I support that completely. This isn't a test. It's an opportunity, and opportunities can be declined without consequences." Jake thought about Maya, about the stability they'd finally achieved, thought about Carlos, still in rehab, who'd need mentorship, thought about all those workers in all the cities who still worked on dangerous sites with inadequate protection. "I'll do it," he said, "on one condition." "Name it." "Carlos Mendez gets hired as my assistant director the moment he's cleared for work. He knows this industry, he's earned the opportunity, and I trust him." Victoria laughed. "Done. I'll have the paperwork ready Monday. Congratulations, Jake. You've come a long way from that beam 50 stories up." After they hung up, Jake sat in his quiet apartment, processing everything. Vice president, an expanded team, the power to influence an entire industry's safety standards. It was terrifying and exhilarating, and exactly what Sarah had always said he was capable of. He walked to Maya's room and stood in the doorway, watching the empty bed, imagining his daughter sleeping safely at her friend's house. healthy and happy and unburdened by the fears that had consumed her 6 months ago. "We made it, baby," he whispered into the darkness. "We actually made it." The city glowed beyond his windows, millions of lights marking millions of lives. Some of those lives were construction workers heading to night shifts, trusting their equipment, believing someone was looking out for them. Jake had spent 23 years being one of them. Now he spent his days protecting them. It was the best kind of full circle, from the beams to the boardroom, but never forgetting what it felt like to balance 50 stories up with nothing but skill and trust keeping you alive. Jake's phone buzzed one final time. A text from an unknown number. "Mr. Lawson, this is Tommy Briggs. I'm writing from jail. My lawyer says taking responsibility helps at sentencing. I wanted you to know I'm sorry for what I did. You were right about the safety violations. Carlos got hurt because of my choices. I can't undo that, but I can make sure other people know the truth. I've been talking to investigators, giving them everything about how the system works, how corner cutting becomes normal. Maybe it helps, maybe it doesn't. But I needed to say it. You didn't deserve what I put you through. Neither did Carlos. I'm sorry." Jake stared at the message for a long time. He thought about responding, about accepting the apology or rejecting it, or explaining how much damage Tommy's choices had caused. But in the end, he just deleted the message. Some wounds didn't need words. They needed time and changed behavior and systems that made the wounds impossible in the first place. He was building those systems now. One policy at a time, one inspection at a time, one life protected at a time. It was December 23rd when Jake returned to the cemetery for the first time since that day with Victoria. He brought flowers, roses, Sarah's favorite, and stood before her headstone in the winter cold. "Hey," he said quietly. "Sorry it's been a while. Things have been complicated. Good complicated mostly, but complicated." He told her everything about the job, the sabotage, the trial, the promotion, about Maya thriving, about Carlos healing, about the workers who were safer now because one desperate man had refused to stay silent. "I don't know if you can hear this," Jake said. "I don't know if that's how death works. But if you can, I kept my promise. I took care of Maya. I didn't give up. I became the man you always said I could be." The wind picked up, stirring the flowers around her grave. Jake pulled his coat tighter and just stood there, breathing, remembering, mourning what he'd lost while being grateful for what remained. "I miss you every day," he whispered. "But we're okay. Maya's okay. And I think maybe that's what love looks like after someone's gone. Carrying them forward, living the life they believed you could live, protecting the things they cared about." He stayed until his fingers went numb, then walked back to his car. Maya was waiting at home. They were baking cookies for Christmas Eve, a new tradition they were building together. The drive home took him past the Morrison Tower site, now fully operational again, its steel skeleton reaching toward the sky. Jake looked up at it through his windshield and felt something settle in his chest. That building would stand for decades, maybe longer. And every person who worked on it, every person who eventually lived or worked inside it, would be safer because of the changes he'd helped make. That was legacy. Not the job title or the salary or the recognition, just the simple fact that people would go home to their families because someone had cared enough to make sure they could. Jake pulled into his parking space and headed upstairs. He could smell cookies before he even opened the door. Maya and Mrs. Chen had gotten a head start. His daughter's laughter echoed through the apartment, pure and bright and alive. He stood in the doorway for a moment, just listening, just feeling grateful for impossible second chances and helicopter rides and board meetings and everything strange and terrifying and wonderful that had happened since that moment on the beam when he'd been holding an eviction notice in one pocket and his daughter's photo in the other. Life could change in an instant, could pivot from disaster to salvation on a single decision, a single moment of courage, a single refusal to accept that poverty and powerlessness were permanent conditions. Jake had learned that the hard way, had lived it, survived it, and somehow come out the other side stronger. "Dad!" Maya appeared, flower in her hair, grinning. "Come help! Mrs. Chen says you have to decorate the angel cookies because you're tall enough to see them from heaven's perspective." Jake laughed. A real laugh, full and unburdened, and followed his daughter into the kitchen where cookies waited and life continued, and everything that had been broken was slowly, carefully being rebuilt into something that might actually last. Outside, the city hummed with its endless energy. Construction cranes dotted the skyline, their lights blinking like stars. Workers climbed steel beams and welded joints and built the future one rivet at a time, trusting that someone was making sure they'd survive to see what they'd created. And somewhere in a corner office downtown, a briefcase sat ready for Monday morning, filled with plans and policies and the determined vision of a former ironworker who'd learned that the only way to honor the people you'd lost was to protect the people who remained. Jake Lawson had been fired for doing the right thing, had saved a woman's life, had been given an impossible opportunity, and somehow turned it into purpose. Now he was exactly where he needed to be, home with his daughter, baking cookies, planning for tomorrow, and believing in the kind of future that 6 months ago had seemed like an impossible dream. The scaffolding had collapsed, but Jake had rebuilt. The job had been lost, but a better one had been found. The grief remained, but so did hope. And in the end, that was enough. It was more than enough. It was everything.